Chapter 411. After 3 days of recuperation, Chunshi finally slashed out with his sword. This was also the first time he had launched an attack in his peak state since returning to Earth. Of course, the target of his attack wasn't a person or object, and it was the boundless sky. The elegance of this sword could be said to be shocking the world. If one were to overlook the Earth from space, they would be able to clearly see that on the surface of this blue planet, a beam of light suddenly shot up into the sky like a celestial pillar. The dazzling sword light tore through the clouds, and the quintessential essence dispersed like ripples, spreading out wave after wave. Wherever the true essence went, the climate of the area would even change dramatically. The northern part of the land of polar night suddenly became as bright as day. Heavy rain suddenly fell on the parched and scorching Africa. Even Hawaii, which was like spring all year round, welcomed a strange snowstorm at this moment. The clouds were like confetti in a bottle, shaking violently with the shaking of the bottle. As a result, abnormal weather conditions appeared in various areas. The torrential rain had yet to stop, but the sun had already risen in the blink of an eye. The atmosphere became unbearably turbulent, and the turbulence caused by the true essence almost affected all the flights around the world. In the blink of an eye, the emergency communications from the captains blew up the command towers of various airports. Feeling the violent shaking of the plane, the unlucky passengers felt as if doomsday was coming. Some of the pessimists even began to write their wills. At this moment, how insignificant were the weak mortals. Thank goodness. This sudden change in weather didn't last long, and everything soon returned to normal. After all, Chunshi was not a villain who had come to Earth to wreak havoc. He just wanted to force open the divine gate with his own strength. He was only one step away from the insightful emptiness realm. However, this one step of difference was like a heavenly moat in front of him. The peak of the divine transformation realm, and the early Dongxi realm. It seemed like there was not much difference between them, but in reality, the difference was like heaven and earth. If one were to say that they were only comprehending the laws of heaven and earth before the divine transformation stage, only after reaching the insightful emptiness realm could one truly be considered to be using the laws of heaven and earth. The true essence of the word void was the first law that an immortal cultivator had to master. And it was precisely because of this difference that Chunshi could only watch helplessly in the lower realm. Even though he knew that the soul mirror was the source of all suffering, he couldn't go to heaven capital to find a solution. The gate of heaven did not open. Could it be that he wasn't going? Chunshi naturally could not accept such an outcome. If Qin Ruoying's soul really dissipated in front of his eyes, and he could only watch helplessly, it seemed that Chunshi would never forgive himself in this lifetime. Thus, he had no choice but to take the risk and forcefully open the passageway between the two worlds with his soul formation stage cultivation base. It must be mentioned here. Opening and opening were two completely different concepts. The Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had built enough connections between the two realms, so Chunshi didn't need to open up another channel. He only needed to open up the channel that was originally closed. Just like unblocking the sewers, with the sound transmission talisman as the coordinates, and the glorious sundial temple as the starting point. After 3 days of recuperation, Chunshi had accurately found the entry point between the big world and Earth through the voice-transmitting talisman. That was why he had made such a shocking move today. With his own strength, he opened the divine gate with his sword. Not long after the sword light was slashed out, Bai Hong's eyes suddenly widened. His lips trembled as he wanted to say something. But after moving his lips for a long time, he still couldn't say a word. This feeling, Bai Hong was too familiar. It was the divine gate. The divine gate was really about to open. As expected, the moment the sword light disappeared, a violent storm suddenly blew up on the peak of the snow mountain where the three of them were. Then, an extremely dazzling light suddenly bloomed from the void. Bai Hong took a closer look and found that although this light was much smaller than what they had seen in the past, the feeling it gave him was no different from the divine gate in his impression. The divine gate was actually forcefully opened by someone. Bai Hong looked at Chunshi not far away with a shocked expression. At this moment, Chunshi's slightly tired face finally revealed a gratified smile. This sword strike used 120% of his strength. After the sword strike, Chunshi was like an ordinary person who had just finished a marathon. He was sweating profusely, gasping for breath, and his mental state looked a little dispirited. However, just as Chun-Shi was about to smile, this light door was like a candle flame in the wind, and it began to shrink rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but tremble. Are you kidding me? The divine gate was going to close so soon. In a hurry, Chun-Shi didn't even have time to adjust his breathing. He grabbed Bai Hong and Shui Xiang and rushed into the light door as fast as he could. The three of them successfully rushed into the light door. Then this light door was like a broken light bulb. It suddenly burst out with an extremely dazzling light, and then disappeared completely. Everything returned to silence. The wind and snow once again drifted on the peak of the snow mountain. The whistling cold wind continued to blow, and the snow quickly covered the traces left by the three of them. At the same time, Floating Mist Mountain, which was also located in Karakoram Kunlun, but little known to people, Jiang Yan was standing on the peak of the mountain with his hands behind his back. He stared in the direction of the light pillar with his sharp eyes. After the light pillar finally disappeared, Jiang Yan closed his eyes and carefully sensed it. That powerful aura disappeared. After confirming that there was no mistake, Jiang Yan's mouth suddenly curved into a faint smile. Then, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became more and more brilliant. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha 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 ha. Back to Chun-Shi and the other two. When Chun-Shi grabbed Bai Hong and Shui Xiang and plunged into the light door, his vision suddenly turned dark. Like a loach plunging headfirst into the mud, behind the light door. There was no light, no wind. There was no sound. Chun-Shi couldn't see anything. Wherever his divine sense went, it was empty in all directions. It was like a vacuum bag. There wasn't even any air here. Thus, Chun-Shi reached out and lit up a ball of light. But after the ball of light lit up, Chun-Shi still couldn't see anything. Other than his body, there was only endless darkness in this dark space. Where are the two of them? Chun-Shi looked around and couldn't help but feel puzzled. Bai Hong and Shui Xiang were personally captured by him and entered the heavenly gate. But after entering the door, Chun-Shi's connection with the two of them was completely cut off. Chun-Shi thought that he had been ambushed and subconsciously wanted to draw his sword, but he found that he had lost the flowing cloud sword at some point in time. Right now, he was only left with the training clothes he wore when he set off. Chun-Shi had no choice but to search aimlessly in this dark space. But after flying for a long time, he still hadn't reached the end. Along the way, there was nothing in the range of his divine sense. There was no other way. Chun-Shi could only try to fly down. But after flying for a long time, he couldn't find the ground. Chun-Shi thought that his sense of direction was wrong, so he flew horizontally again. This time, he still flew for a long time. Chun-Shi still didn't fly to the border. Where is Tiandu? Where did Bai Hong and Shui Xiang go? What is this place? Chun-Shi was a little flustered. Everything in front of him was completely beyond his imagination. How to describe that feeling? He was now like a wisp of dust floating in the universe. But there were no planets in this universe, let alone anything that could be called an object, apart from him. This universe was a complete vacuum, leaving behind only boundless darkness. He couldn't fly to the end. He couldn't see anything, there was no reference point. There was no gravity, no magnetic field, no radiation, and there was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. F***CK Chapter 412. Chun-Shi used to think that there was only one thing he couldn't figure out in his entire life, and that was, how did he get to Heavenly Spiral? Who would have thought? Chun-Shi hadn't even figured out the first thing, and the second thing that he couldn't figure out had already happened. This dark space was like a small black cell that imprisoned felons. At first, Chun-Shi tried to think of ways to escape, but as time passed, Chun-Shi realized that everything he did was useless. This place could be said to be, there was no road to heaven and no door to hell. Only boundless darkness enveloped him. Chun-Shi released tens of thousands of light balls. For every 100 kilometers he flew, he left a light ball in the darkness. He tried to use the light ball as a reference point to find the boundary of the dark space. But as time passed, Chun-Shi suddenly turned around and realized that even though the light balls he left behind had become a vast galaxy, He still couldn't fly to the boundary of the dark space. Perhaps this was the true meaning of boundless? After several fruitless attempts, Chunchi's true essence had already been consumed by about 70 to 80%. There was no heaven and earth spirit chi here. If this continued, Chunchi would be like a lamp that ran out of oil before they could find the exit. Chunchi had no choice but to give up struggling. Then he silently sat cross-legged in the darkness. In order to conserve his inner core, Chunchi didn't even light up the light balls again. The remaining inner core flowed slowly in his body, and Chunchi's brain worked quickly. He started to pay attention to the passage of time, 1 second, 1 minute, 1 moment, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. Chunchi's mind was firm. The endless darkness didn't cause him to lose his mind. But as time passed, Chunchi's heart gradually became heavy. He closed his eyes, then opened them. 3 months had passed. This dark space was clearly endless, but Chunchi felt especially oppressed. It was as if he would be swallowed by the darkness at any time. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. Once Tiandu built his soul bridge, Ying's divine soul would vanish into thin air. By then, even if the Daluo Golden Immortal descended, he would be powerless. Chunchi couldn't accept being trapped here, because he still had a lot of things to do. In a moment of desperation, Chunchi flew up and down in the darkness like a headless fly, roaring loudly. He tried his best to make as much noise as possible. However, this dark space didn't even give him a trace of a reply. Very soon, a year passed. The long period of darkness and the mental pressure brought about by the rush to save Ying's to begin with, Chunchi's to begin to collapse. He grabbed his own hair with a pained expression, and could only let out a series of howls that were close to wailing. "Let me out! Let me out! Let me out! I beg you." His voice was loud and impassioned at first, but it gradually became low and hoarse. In the end, it completely turned into a feeble and pitiful pleading. In the blink of an eye, 10 years passed. Chunchi was in complete despair. He was like a puppet that had lost its soul. He floated numbly in the darkness, as silent as a corpse. If someone were to approach his body, they would hear his mouth squirming. He could still speak, but he just kept repeating this sentence. "It's too late. Too late, too late, too late." 10 years had passed. Ying's soul should have long dissipated. Even if he were to be let out now, it was too late. It was hopeless. It was already hopeless. Chunchi clearly remembered every detail when he was with Ying. It was also because of this that the sweetness of the past had now become a sharp knife that ruthlessly slashed at his heart again and again. Self-blame, pain, regret, sadness, anxiety, worry, irritation, frustration, anger. All the negative emotions of human beings were gathered in Chunchi's heart at this moment. If it was possible, he would rather die than stay in this boundless darkness. Fortunately, Chunchi still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Last year, today, in this door, human faces and peach blossoms were rosy. I don't know where the human faces are, but the peach blossoms are still smiling in the spring breeze. He had already parted with Ying once. He had stayed in heavenly spiral for 500 years, but only 5 years had passed on Earth. Who knew how many years a year in this godforsaken place was equivalent to on Earth? Thinking of this, Chunchi couldn't help but erupt with an extremely strong will to live. Yes. Before determining the time difference between the two worlds, how could he give up on himself? Before the moment the truth was revealed, how could he be hit by his own negative emotions first? Chunchi sat cross-legged again. He didn't want to think about those things anymore. Instead, he began to repeatedly ponder the mystery of this dark space. Since this dark space could trap an immortal cultivator at the peak of the soul formation realm, it meant that this space was definitely extraordinary. Chunchi directly ruled out the possibility that Tiandu was behind this. It wasn't that he looked down on Tiandu, but that Tiandu really didn't have that ability. Even if the Grand Pure One was alive, it was absolutely impossible for him to play with him in the palm of his hand like this. As such, after pondering over it again and again, Chunchi suddenly had a guess in his heart. Could it be that there was an accident when he opened the heavenly gate with his sword, and that was why he barged into this endless dark space? Came uninvited? Waiting for him? Or catching a turtle in a jar? He hadn't comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he didn't understand what was needed to cross the two worlds. A huge amount of vital essence. Obviously, it was more than that. Chunshi began to think about this problem seriously. Even if he was deep in darkness, he had to maintain a clear mind. Chunshi kept thinking. But time never stopped waiting for him. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. Let's talk about Nian first. Ever since Chunshi left, the little girl had been thinking about him all the time. On one hand, it was because Grandpa's cooking was not as good as Daddy's. On the other hand, it was because Mommy had been lying in bed motionless. Without the company of Daddy and Mommy, the little girl was indeed very uncomfortable and was not used to it. Therefore, she had to video call Chunshi at least 10 times a day. Fortunately, before Chunshi left, he had already made all the preparations. She didn't know what agreement he had reached with Wu Lian. In short, after Chunshi left, Wu Lian set up a team to deal with the little girl's video bombardment that could come at any time. Therefore, with the support of national technology, Chunshi's appearance could always appear vividly in front of the little girl. This also greatly eased the little girl's longing. Detective Conan could lie to Xiaolan until the end with just a phone call, let alone Chunshi who used a video call. Under the constant comfort of Chunshi, the little girl also welcomed a new year. This year's spring festival was much earlier than last year. February 4th. New Year's Eve. Early in the morning, Wang Chuanju and Qin Yongwang brought a large group of people to the Qin family's courtyard. In order to make the little girl happy, the big brothers and sisters from the various departments of the Martial Arts Alliance used all their strength. They practically treated her like a little princess. They held her in their hands, afraid that she would fall, and in their mouths, afraid that she would break. With so many people trying to make the little girl happy, even without the company of Daddy and Mommy, the little girl had a very happy new year. Chapter 413. Children don't remember things. Once there's something happy, they'll quickly throw their worries aside. Nian is naturally the same. It's just that her happiness is like the tide, always coming in waves. After the tide recedes, there will still be a large beach full of holes poked by stone crabs. It's impossible for the little fellow to stay excited forever. Therefore, every night when she goes to bed, it's the time of the day when she misses her father the most. Chunshi was still telling her stories in the video, but the little girl didn't fall asleep after listening to it like she used to. She always asks her father to finish one story after another, as if she has inexhaustible energy. Every time this happens, Qin Yongyan will silently wait at the side. It wasn't until Chunshi on the other end of the video repeatedly ordered the little guy to sleep that the little guy would pout and lie back on the bed. At this time, Qin Yongyan will turn off the light and quietly leave the west wing. Qin Yongyan once thought of bringing the little fellow to live with him in the main room, but the little fellow is unwilling no matter what. She wants to sleep with her mother, although her mother never responds to her. The little fellow has been staying in this courtyard full of spiritual energy, surrounded by all the cultivators above the celestial being stage. Under normal circumstances, the little fellow should have already become a child genius. But she didn't. Because Chunshi has already placed a seal on her, the little fellow's intelligence has always been at the level of a normal person. Chunshi only wants to give Nian a normal childhood. He doesn't want her to become a weirdo among her peers. Chunshi's reason for doing this is very good. Just like what Jack Ma said. The biggest mistake in my life is to establish Alibaba. But before this sentence, there's actually another sentence. I regret that I'm always busy with work and have no time to accompany my family. If I can live again, I definitely won't be like this again. My wife said it well, you're not my person, you belong to Alibaba. The unscrupulous media took the words out of context, causing the meaning of this sentence to completely change. Cultivation is not a matter of time. For immortal cultivators with long lifespans, what did a few years count for? Nian only had one childhood. Why couldn't she be allowed to play happily for a few years without any worries? Chunshi's idea was very good. Unfortunately, a thought was just a thought. When Chunshi embarked on a strange journey to save Yingying, the happy life of the family of three was completely shattered. Chunshi considered that he might not be able to stay by Nian's side to protect her, So after hesitating for a while, he personally removed the first layer of the seal on Nianyan's body. When she turned 12 and 18, the second and third layers of the seal would automatically be removed. If by that time, if Chunxi hadn't come back yet, Qin Yongyan would have told Nianyan the truth. It was up to her to make her own choices in the future. Let's go back to that damn dark space. Since Chunxi broke the demonic barrier and kept his spiritual altar clear, time had become meaningless to him. There was no spiritual energy here, so breathing seemed to have become a kind of consumption. There wasn't much true qi left in Chunxi's body, so he could only gather the remaining true qi in order to keep his body alive. He hadn't moved for 100 years. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally, there couldn't be dust. So even if 100 years had passed, Chunxi didn't seem to have changed at all. The only change was, maybe it was a slight change in his demeanor. Chunxi had long been used to everything around him. After experiencing the initial anger and despair, his state of mind had become calmer. Before he saw it with his own eyes, he would never think in a bad way. What Chunxi was going through now was actually very similar to what Robinson was going through, but much more miserable than Robinson. After all, even if Robinson was trapped on an isolated island and didn't have enough food to eat and clothes to cover his body, Robinson still picked up a volleyball to amuse himself. What about Chunxi? Without being able to replenish the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he didn't even dare to move. Deduce a cultivation technique? Could a mere soul formation cultivator deduce and optimize the Sky Yin divine sex treasured scripture? Try to understand the true meaning of the word void? Without practice, all great ideas were just empty words. Bored, Chunxi could only recall the bits and pieces of the past. Just like watching a TV series, he watched the story about himself over and over again. And every time he watched it, he enjoyed it very much. Whenever he thought of how cute Nianyan was when she acted coquettishly in front of him, Chunxi's lips would even curl up into a faint smile. To be honest, with Chunxi's current state, his thinking had definitely improved by more than one level. Perhaps this was also a kind of training. Even if he was trapped, Chunxi had to be calm. In the blink of an eye, another 100 years had passed. After 200 years of darkness imprisonment, Chunxi's mind didn't collapse, but his body couldn't take it anymore. Because his true essence had long been exhausted. Without the support of true essence, there would be a day when the physical body would deteriorate. Once the physical body deteriorated, then Chunxi's soul wouldn't be far from dispersing. After all, this place didn't have a suitable physical body for him to possess. Thinking of this, Chunxi's withered face couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile. He persevered for a long time. He really tried his best. If possible, Chunxi hoped that time here would be much slower than the outside world. Because only then could he go to the bridge of helplessness and quietly wait for the arrival of his lover. Ying, I'm sorry. At this moment, Chunxi's heart was like dead ashes. He closed his eyes tightly, and the remaining tears flowed out uncontrollably. However, just as Chunxi was floating in the darkness waiting for death, a ray of light suddenly appeared in the darkness. It was really light. However, the light was very weak, and it seemed to be very far away from Chunxi. Chunxi didn't notice the appearance of this light. As his breath became weaker, the light became brighter and brighter. Finally, Chunxi noticed something strange. He hadn't seen light for more than 100 years. After feeling the abnormality caused by the light shining on his eyelids, Chunxi's eyelids suddenly trembled slightly. Then, he was like a drowning man, twisting madly in the darkness. Chunxi used the last of his strength to open his eyes, and saw that the light seemed to be right in front of him. Light! I'm saved. I'm saved. The moment he saw the light, Chunxi's heart suddenly exploded with an extremely strong will to live. He didn't know where he got the strength from, but his body suddenly bounced up, and then he tried his best to run towards the light at the fastest speed. As the light got closer and closer, Chunxi's pupils couldn't help but become bigger and bigger. He was a little excited and a little scared. He was afraid that everything in front of him was an illusion before he died. Thinking of this, Chunxi suddenly closed his eyes, and then plunged into the light. By the time Chunxi's body was submerged in the light was like a firework, instantly disappearing from the dark space. But at this moment, in this dark space that imprisoned Chen-Shi for 200 years, a woman's voice suddenly sounded. He can't die here. The woman seemed to be talking to someone. If Chen-Shi was still here, he would definitely feel that this woman's voice was very familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. Sure enough, as soon as the woman's voice fell, a man's voice immediately followed. This is the reason for your interference? Do you know what the consequences are? I know. It's good that you know. The conversation came to an abrupt end. Chapter 4:14. After Chen-Shi plunged into the light, a cool and refreshing feeling enveloped him. That feeling? It was like a traveler in the desert who had been exposed to the sun for 3 days and suddenly fell into an underground cold pool. The surging spiritual energy of heaven and earth flowed into his body, instantly causing Chen-Shi's dried-up dantian to glow with vitality. Chen-Shi gasped for breath and frantically grasped the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth around him. He did not even care where he was. After jumping out of the light, he directly sat cross-legged on the ground and adjusted his breathing. Who cares what the situation is? In any case, he had to replenish his vital essence first. After about a level of vital essence in his body had recovered, Chen-Shi swept away the dispirited look on his face. At this moment, he looked like a famous ancient sword that had just been unearthed. Although there was still a lot of mud on the surface, after unsheathing, the sharp edge of the sword still shone with a piercing cold light. Spiritual energy of heaven and earth. How long has it been since I felt such dense spiritual energy? Feeling the continuous accumulation of vital essence in his body, Chen-Shi could not help but look intoxicated, like a drunkard who had tasted the finest nectar. Then he finally opened his eyes slowly. After looking around, a trace of inexplicable surprise appeared on his face. I really escaped? This place. Could it be the Great World? Chen-Shi looked around and found himself in a strange place. The giant trees in this place towered into the sky. Each one of them was hundreds of meters tall and incomparably thick. The ground was covered with dense vegetation formed by ferns and wood tapestry. Such a flourishing and dense forest scene almost dazzled Chen-Shi's eyes. One had to know that he had not seen anything for 200 years. Suddenly coming to such a lively place, Chen-Shi's heart was immediately filled with a kind of joy of seeing the light of day again. But immediately after that, Chen-Shi's face immediately darkened. He had been trapped in the dark space for 200 years, and did not know how long had passed in the outside world. If the soul bridge had been built, wouldn't Yingying's soul have been destroyed? How could that be? Thinking of this, Chen-Shi could no longer sit still. He didn't even bother to replenish his true essence and directly flew into the air above the dense forest, preparing to capture someone to ask about the situation. If Yingying was fine, that would be fine. If anything happened to Yingying, he would have to fight to the death with Tian-Du for the rest of his life. As Chen-Shi prepared for the worst, he quickly flew into the air. However, when he flew out of the forest and into the sky, Chen-Shi suddenly discovered something. The great world before his eyes was completely different from what he had imagined. In Chen-Shi's imagination, the great world should be a planet like Earth. But what appeared in front of him now? They were countless floating islands in the void. Just like in the movie Avatar, these floating islands were either big or small. The vegetation on the islands was lush, and they all had a complete ecosystem. In fact, calling it a floating island didn't seem right. To be exact, it should be called a mountain. One mountain range after another floated in the void. After all, the great world was just a small plane in a crack in the void. It couldn't be measured by the common sense of the universe. There was no sun in the great world, and all the light came from the great sun-moon star formation that the Taiching divine ancestor had inscribed on the boundary of the plane. Under the illumination of the great sun-moon star formation, the great world had a day and night like Earth. He didn't know how big this space was. With just a cursory glance, Chen-Shi saw thousands of floating islands of different sizes, and the floating island he was on was considered relatively small. The floating islands were either high or low, and each island was surrounded by immortal clouds. Chen-Shi listened attentively, and found that there were vigorous roars of beasts coming from the depths of the forest. Suddenly, a giant golden bird swept past Chen-Shi's eyes. After grabbing a strange beast the size of an elephant from the forest below him, the giant bird turned around and flew toward another floating island. Such a strange scene was really amazing. Because Chunxi had just escaped from the dark space, he had a better understanding of it. Thus, Chunxi looked into the distance and set his gaze beyond the group of floating islands, to a place where even the great sun-moon star formation couldn't illuminate. There was nothing but emptiness. It was still that endless darkness. Although there were many floating islands, they couldn't fill up such a huge dark space. This great world, wasn't this the upgraded and expanded version of the dark space? If there were no surprises, this small plane should be similar to the dark space, and there shouldn't be anything in it. After the Taiqing divine ancestor discovered this plane, he moved countless mountains from somewhere, and that was how the great world became the size it was today. Mountains could be moved, but where did the rich spirit qi of heaven and earth come from? Chunxi was stunned by the Taiqing divine ancestor's extravagance. Only now did he realize that his understanding of the Taiqing divine ancestor was too one-sided. This great figure who had single-handedly turned the dark space into a cultivation holy land comparable to heavenly spiral, and saved the ancient cultivators. What level had he reached? Insightful emptiness? Tao integration? Or perhaps the legendary tribulation true immortal? Chunxi frowned and pondered for a long time. In the end, he could only put these questions to the back of his mind. After all, he had more important things to do now. Presumably because the great world couldn't produce spirit qi on its own. Chunxi rested for a while, and realized that the spirit qi of heaven and earth in the great world was only slightly richer than on earth. Perhaps this was the main reason why Tiandu had decided to return? For Yingying's sake, Chunxi had to stop Tiandu from building a soul bridge. It was still the same sentence. Even 200 years of imprisonment hadn't extinguished the last bit of hope in his heart. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, then Yingying would always be waiting for him to save her. Chunxi hid his figure, and stealthily passed through the various floating islands. While grasping the spirit qi of heaven and earth on each island, he quickly flew in the direction of Tiandu. It was a pity that Baihong and Shuixiang had run off somewhere. Otherwise, Chunxi could have prepared a battle plan in advance. How did Chunxi know where Tiandu was? Wasn't this nonsense? The island with the densest spirit qi and the largest floating island. Wasn't that Tiandu's headquarters? Chunxi didn't go near the largest floating island. Because his true essence was exhausted. It would take at least 3 months to recover to peak condition. He had endured 200 years, what more a mere 3 months? Chunxi wasn't in a hurry. In order to be able to observe Tiandu's movements at any time, he lurked on a nearby floating island. 3 months. Yingying, wait for me. When my true essence recovers, it will be the time when my true essence ends. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful book mobile version website. .com. Chapter 415. 3 months passed by in a flash. In order not to be detected, Chunxi plundered large amounts of heaven and earth spirit qi from hundreds of floating islands during this period of time. After all, he was a soul formation cultivator. Now that he was determined to cultivate in seclusion, how could outsiders easily detect him? The only thing that could attract the attention of Tiandu was probably the rate at which the spirit qi on these floating islands was dissipating. Chunxi's heart was always on the soul mirror, so when he was not cultivating, he could not help but take time out to walk around a few times. As a result, he gradually gained a basic understanding of the great world. There were a total of 120,000 floating islands in the great world. If all the floating islands were piled together, the surface area was even larger than the moon, almost the size of Asia. The floating islands were not eternal. Once the heaven and earth spirit qi on the island was exhausted, the floating island would completely lose its vitality and float to the periphery of the floating islands. Chunxi had not figured out the source of the heaven and earth spirit qi for the time being. However, he was sure that the floating islands here were like batteries. After they were used up, they would not immediately become useless. Instead, they would float to the periphery and wait for the heaven and earth spirit qi to slowly recover. As for what kind of method did the floating islands use to recover their spirit qi? Obviously, Chunxi still needed to observe for a while more. Every island had its own ecosystem. Apart from heaven and earth treasures and rare beasts, of course, there were also many descendants of ancient cultivators living here. Chunshi went to a few nearby floating islands, but found that these people were like the Jiang clan, who were holed up in Daiyu Island. They had a clear concept of community, and it could be said that each island did not interfere with the other's business. You're on your island, I'm on mine. Everyone abided by their duties, and it seemed that they would never interact with each other. On this day, after Chunshi cultivated for 36 cycles as usual, he let out a deep breath of turbid qi. Although the great world had begun to decline, the density of heaven and earth spirit qi was still comparable to when the tides were surging in the lower realm. Therefore, his true yuan recovered very quickly. Now that he had mostly recovered, he estimated that he would be able to return to his peak state in a few days. And as his condition improved, the strange phenomena caused by Chunshi's cultivation also became more and more powerful. Therefore, although the mountain peak he was on was covered by a concealing array, as long as someone stepped into the array, they would be able to see the spiritual energy of heaven and earth swarming towards them like clouds and mist. From afar, it was as if Chunshi was sitting at the bottom of a huge funnel, and Bicker was constantly pouring spiritual energy into his body. While Chunshi was busy sorting out the true essence in his body, a figure suddenly flew out from the floating island where Tiandu was, and arrived above Chunshi's floating island in the blink of an eye. Chunshi only took a cursory glance and discovered that this person's true essence was thick and his aura was incomparably powerful. He was at least in existence on the same level as Bai Hong. Divine General? In fact, in the 3 months that Chunshi had been here, she had discovered a strange thing. Apart from the floating island where Tiandu was, he didn't find any divine general level cultivators on the other floating islands. This was obviously somewhat illogical. As the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Although Chunshi's overall plan was disrupted by the sudden appearance of the dark space, he still learned the general structure of Tiandu from Bai Hong in advance. First of all, the celestial lords of 10 directions, led by Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others, were the core of the entire Tiandu. These 10 people were also the strongest in the big world. Chunshi hadn't fought with a celestial lord yet, but from Bai Hong's description, Chunshi could basically conclude that a celestial lord should be equivalent to a cultivator at the divinity transformation stage. As for whether a celestial lord or a divinity transformation cultivator was stronger or weaker, this question was obviously only known to Chunshi after he personally fought with one. In addition to the celestial lords of 10 directions, Tiandu also had the divine generals of 5 directions, who were respectively in charge of the east, south, west, north, and center. There were a total of 36 people, 10 celestial lords and 36 divine generals of 5 directions. In addition, there were 72 Rakshasa lords whose strength was second only to the divine generals, as well as countless celestial lords. It wasn't that Chunshi wanted to boost the morale of others and belittle his own prestige, but with Tiandu's strength and foundation, even in the Tiandu domain, it was enough to dominate a region. In the past 3 months, Chunshi hadn't seen any divine generals or celestial lords, so he gradually became a little uneasy. Could it be Tiandu had already built a soul bridge and went to the lower realm? Every time he thought of this, Chunshi couldn't help but worry in his heart, and was very eager to go to Tiandu to see the situation. But considering that his cultivation had not yet recovered, and that he would definitely not end well if he stood out, Chunshi could only forcibly suppress this terrible thought. 200 years had passed, and there was no point in being anxious. Therefore, Chunshi had even prepared for the worst. If Yingying was fine, then it would be fine, but if something happened to Yingying, even if he risked his old life, he was bound to bite off a large piece of Tiandu's flesh. Since he couldn't be with her for the rest of his life, then he must avenge her for the rest of his life, until he died. Chunshi's mind was full of twists and turns. When he saw the divine general appear, he was immediately overjoyed instead of shocked, and hurriedly followed him secretly. The divine general didn't stay in the air for long. After hurriedly sweeping a glance around the floating island, he directly landed on the square in the center of the floating island. This divine general was about 30 years old, and seemed to be slightly older than Bai Hong. His appearance was rather rough, and his armor shone with a cold light, looking particularly impressive. As soon as he landed, the divine general frowned and asked the crowd, "Who sounded the dragon's alarm drum?" At this time, the residents of the island had all gathered here. One of the elders seemed to be the person in charge of this floating island, so he immediately stepped forward and replied, "Reporting to Divine General Qin Yang, this old man is the peak's head Fu Anqing." It was this old man who ordered people to sound the dragon's alarm drum. Hearing this, the man called Divine General Qin Yang sized up the old man. This floating island was called Amethyst Peak, and the peak's head was the highest leader of this floating island, roughly equivalent to the village chief of a village. Do you know the consequences of recklessly sounding the dragon's alarm drum? Of course this old man knows, but this matter is very serious. I hope Divine General Qin Yang can resolve this problem for my Amethyst Peak. What exactly is the matter? Divine General Qin Yang patiently asked a few questions before learning the whole story from the old man. It turned out that there was a problem with Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein. Each floating island only had one dragon's vein, and the dragon's vein was the lifeblood of the entire floating island, and at the same time, the source of the island's spirit chi. Under normal circumstances, Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein would dry up after at least 100 years. However, this dragon's vein had some kind of problem, and the spirit chi it produced every day was gradually decreasing. In the past few days, it was on the verge of death. At this rate, Amethyst Peak would probably be abandoned in a few months. Since the elder was a peak's head, how could he not panic? Bring me to take a look. After a simple negotiation, the elder led Divine General Qin Yang to the dragon's vein to check it out. It was obvious that the drying up of Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein had something to do with Chunxi. This floating island was the closest to Tiandu, and Chunxi had spent the most time on this floating island, so he had cut off almost half of the spirit qi produced by the dragon's vein. Who would have thought that this would alarm Divine General Tiandu? Now that Chunxi was done with his work, the dragon's vein naturally returned to normal. Divine General Qin Yang took a closer look, and after finding that the problem wasn't very big, he roared at the elder angrily. Yuhuan Tianzuan ordered the 5 divine generals to gather at the Imperial Extreme Palace, and you sounded the dragon's alarm drum for such a small matter? I think you're trying to hang yourself. Are you tired of living? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 416. One must know that the dragon's scare drum was similar to a beacon tower. Whenever the dragon's scare drum sounded, the 5 divine generals closest to the island had to immediately put down whatever they were doing and rush over to check on the situation as quickly as possible. However, after Divine General Qin Yang's inspection, he discovered that although the output of the dragon's vein was low, it was far from the level where the dragon's scare drum was sounded. What was this? In ancient times, there was King Yu of Zhou toying with the warlords with the beacon fire, and now there was Fu Anqing toying with the divine general with the dragon's scare divine general? One could only imagine how furious Divine General Qin Yang was at this moment. At this time, Fu Anqing also discovered that the dragon's vein was fine, so he instantly knew that he had gotten himself into big trouble today. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged Divine General Qin Yang with a terrified expression. Divine General, please forgive me. This matter is indeed this old man's oversight. It's just that there really was something wrong with the dragon's vein a few days ago, causing us to be unable to cultivate smoothly. At this point, Fu Anqing could not help but look at the dragon's vein with a puzzled expression before continuing to defend himself. To tell you the truth, just before we sounded the dragon's scare drum, this old man had specially sent someone to verify it. Who would have thought? The dragon's scare drum had just sounded, and the dragon's vein returned to normal. Before he finished speaking, Fu Anqing looked like he wanted to cry but had no tears. Even if he had 10 times the courage, he would not dare to casually make fun of the divine general. The goddamn dragon's vein. This time he was really in deep trouble. Even in a society ruled by law, false police reports could be detained, let alone in a feudal society with a strict hierarchy like Tiandu. Therefore, Fu Anqing's defense did not have any effect. Divine General Qingyang could not be bothered to talk nonsense with him. With a wave of his hand, he ordered his men to send Fu Anqing to the death row. This was a critical period, and everyone in Tiandu was extremely tense. Therefore, the matter of Fu Anqing sounding the dragon's scare drum could only be investigated later. Subsequently, Divine General Qingyang warned the people of Purple Jade Peak, then turned and flew back to the floating island where Tiandu was located. Seeing this, Chunxi immediately followed, turning into a stream of light and sticking closely behind Divine General Qingyang. Divine General Qingyang was only at the Yuanying stage, so he naturally didn't notice that there was a tail behind him. Therefore Chunxi, led by Divine General Qingyang, passed through the formation and smoothly arrived at the core of the macro world, Tiandu Dragon Head Peak. There was a very powerful array around the Dragon Head Peak, which was also one of the reasons why Chunxi did not dare to get too close to it. With Divine General Qingyang paving the way, Chunxi was naturally able to barge in very easily. And the reason why Chunxi's infiltration was so smooth was not because the defensive power of Tiandu was so weak, but mainly because, ever since the Grand Pure Saint ancestor established the heavenly capital, the Dragon Head Peak had been a forbidden area in the entire Great World. Who would dare to sneak in without permission? This was a path of no return. However, Chunxi did not consider whether it was dangerous at all. Instead, he resolutely barged in. As soon as he entered the array, Chunxi discovered that the spirit qi on the Dragon Head Peak was exceptionally rich, several times richer than the outside world. It was comparable to the heart-cleansing spirit spring in the forbidden area of the back mountain of the Sky Yin Divine Sect. This place. In addition to the rich spirit qi, Chunxi also discovered that the interior of the array was filled with an extremely unusual energy fluctuation. Chunxi had never seen such a fluctuation before, so he frowned and sensed for a while before a guess gradually formed in his mind. This strange energy fluctuation. Could it be from the soul mirror? At this thought, Chunxi did not care if he had recovered to his peak state, and immediately followed Divine General Qingyang to the core area of the Dragon Head Peak. The core area of the Dragon Head Peak was naturally the core area of the entire macro world, the Lingxiao Imperial Palace. Chunxi silently followed behind Divine General Qingyang. But before he could see the palace, Divine General Qingyang had already landed on the ground and walked along a small path to the peak. Instead of flying, he insisted on walking. Divine General Qingyang's strange behavior was completely due to the rules of Heaven Capital since ancient times. The Dragon Head Peak was the head of the 120,000 floating islands, and the Imperial Palace was located at the peak of the Dragon Head Peak. Therefore, apart from the 10 heavenly venerables, no one could be above the Imperial Palace, not even a Divine General. Chunxi obediently followed behind Divine General Qingyang and walked all the way to the peak of the mountain. As soon as he reached the peak of the mountain, his vision suddenly opened up, following which, Chunxi discovered that the peak of the Dragon Head Peak was extremely flat, as if someone had used a sword to flatten it. At the same time, a huge palace that spanned across the peak of the mountain entered Chunxi's eyes. This is the Imperial Palace? The Imperial Palace spanned across the peak of the Dragon Head Peak, and the first impression it gave was that it was majestic and magnificent. However, Chunxi didn't even have time to carefully observe the Imperial Extreme Hall in front of him. His attention was completely attracted by the plaza at the entrance of the hall. This was a huge plaza that was comparable in size to the Zhonghai Gymnasium. There seemed to be some kind of activity going on in the plaza, and there were actually many people sitting cross-legged there. At a rough count, there were at least a few thousand people. However, although there were many people in the plaza, it wasn't enough to make Chunxi stop and look. What he really cared about was, actually, it was that copper mirror that was floating in the middle of the plaza and constantly emitting divine light. In an instant, 10,000 years in a glance. The moment Chunxi saw this Dharma treasure, the name of this Dharma treasure suddenly jumped out from the bottom of his heart. Sky-bearing technique floating dawn mirror. Chunxi silently sized up the soul mirror in front of him. The soul mirror was constantly shining with divine light, and an unknown energy wave was constantly circulating around it. With one look, One could tell that such a phenomenon was definitely not ordinary. However, in front of a supreme treasure, Chunshi couldn't help but feel a sense of disgust, and he couldn't help but want to smash it into pieces. It was this stupid mirror. It was the one that caused his family to be separated, and he almost lost his family. Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but have a murderous look in his eyes, and he couldn't help but want to take it away on the spot. However, just as Chunshi was about to do something evil, an old man sitting cross-legged in the middle of the hall seemed to have noticed something, and then he suddenly opened his eyes and shouted sternly outside the hall. "Who is it? How dare you come to my Dragon Head Peak and behave so atrociously?" Before he finished speaking, the old man raised his hand and waved his sleeve. A golden light flew out and directly shot towards Chunshi at the other end of the plaza. This move came too suddenly. Chunshi didn't even have time to react, and the golden light had already arrived in front of him. Seeing this, Chunshi's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Feeling the powerful true essence contained in it, Chunshi hurriedly withdrew the aura concealment secret technique, and then like the old man, he waved his sleeve and released a burst of true essence. Then a white light suddenly shot out from Chunshi's palm and collided with the golden light. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 417. The Imperial Hall was the core area of Tiandu, so the celestial venerables of the 10 directions naturally had the most complete control over this place. Although Chunshi had the aura concealment secret technique to protect his body, the moment he saw the sky-bearing technique, he couldn't help but feel a ripple in his heart. That was why a celestial venerable sitting cross-legged in the main hall sensed something strange. And this celestial venerable, who keenly sensed that someone had trespassed on Dragon Head Peak, was someone Chunshi had long heard of, Yuhuan Tianzuan. Although they had never met before, Yuhuan Tianzuan's reputation had long been branded in Chunshi's heart. After all, apart from being Wuxia's biological father, Yuhuan Tianzuan was also the leader of the 10 celestial venerables. If Tiandu was compared to a large multinational company, then Yuhuan Tianzuan was obviously the executive chairman of the company. One could imagine how powerful he was. Therefore, when Yuhuan Tianzuan casually released a burst of true essence, everyone was alarmed. That golden light came too suddenly. After shooting out of the main hall, it was like a laser that pierced through the entire square. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but look sideways. Just as everyone was feeling strange, a figure appeared out of thin air in front of the originally empty mountain gate. Immediately after, that person casually released a ray of white light under the gazes of everyone, colliding with the golden light that shot out from the main hall. Bang! Suddenly, a huge explosion sounded. After all, it was a battle between celestial venerables, so the few Star Lords closest to the center of the explosion were sent flying by the dispersing force. This scene was very similar to the school field at noon. Thousands of teachers and students were excitedly doing broadcast gymnastics. Suddenly, the flag-raising platform exploded for no reason. It was easy to imagine how shocked and astonished everyone present was. In the tens of thousands of years of history of Tiandu, it wasn't that no one had caused trouble on Dragon Head Peak Square, but to dare to cause trouble when all the celestial venerables were gathered on Dragon Head Peak. Chunshi was the first. As the explosion gradually subsided, Chunshi's figure was clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. At the sight of this audacious intruder, some nearby immortal generals uttered long roars at once as they rushed towards Chunshi at the same time. "How dare you? Everyone, follow me and take him down. I'd like to see which bastard dares to behave atrociously on Dragon Head Peak." What kind of joke was this? The 5 divine generals were in charge of guarding one area. Right now, all the divine generals were gathered at Dragon Head Peak, but someone still secretly touched their faces. If this wasn't collective dereliction of duty, then what was? Therefore, even without the orders of the celestial venerables, a divine general was dispatched from each direction to charge at Chunshi. Today, they had to take down this audacious intruder at the first possible moment, and give the Empyreans an explanation. Everyone tacitly agreed that the intruder was doomed. But right at that moment, however, a shocking scene suddenly occurred. The 5 divine generals charged at the intruder from different directions at an extremely fast speed. However, the intruder didn't turn around and run away immediately. Instead, he frowned and clenched his right hand into a fist. Instantly, a long sword condensed from true essence appeared in his hand. Seeing this, the 5 divine generals were instantly enraged like provoked ferocious beasts. They couldn't help but want to tear this audacious intruder into pieces on the spot. Therefore, the 5 divine generals each took out their own trump cards. Regardless of whether this fellow could withstand it, the 5 divine generals roared angrily and launched an attack together. In an instant, brilliant light shot in all directions and the void shook. Surging true essence wreaked havoc in the air above the square. All kinds of Dharma treasures carried the endless anger of their owners and heavily smashed towards the intruder's location. At this moment, the long sword in Chen-Shi's hand also began to dance. The Dharma idol's long sword shone with a green light and shone brightly in his hand. Even compared to the colorful Dharma treasures in the hands of the divine generals, the Dharma idols of the divine generals did not lose out in terms of appearance. Chen-Shi's original plan was to sneak in and observe. He didn't want to alert the enemy. But now that the infiltration failed, he could only come up with Plan B. Plan B was actually very simple. That was, becoming famous in one battle. Establishing dominance through battle. Showing his strength at the peak of the soul formation stage to win respect. And then talk to the 10 celestial lords as equals. Since he wanted to establish dominance, he had to show 120% of his ability in the first move. Although the moonlight sword technique was exquisite, it was not shocking enough. So after Chen-Shi thought about it for a while. Just now, he took out the killing weapon that he had always been unwilling to use in actual combat. The Xuanpu sword technique. The grain god did not die because of the Xuanpu reed, pin betrothal. The Xuanpu gate was the root of heaven and earth. It was continuous and did not need to be used diligently. This move was called Xuanpu. With the creation of yin and yang as the root, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams as the form, there were 8 moves. Qianqian was as strong as the sky, and Dui said it was like rain. Li was as beautiful as the sun and shook like thunder. Sun entered like the wind, and Kan sank like the water. Zhen stopped like the mountain, and Kuan was like the earth. The 8 moves swayed 64 times, and the combination changed. The exquisite parts were endless, and the intricate parts were intertwined. Chen-Shi was now using the first move. Sword raising technique. Sword raising 6 dragons to heaven, grand universe. This sword technique was also the most precious treasure of the heavenly evolution divine sect, but very few people used it. The reason was not that it was not good. Instead, it was because it was too good that very few people used it. After all, things like cultivation techniques, just like feelings, what was suitable for oneself was the best. The Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for Chen-Shi. On one hand, it was because Chen-Shi's cultivation was not enough. On the other hand, it was because this sword technique was very large and required one to use all their strength. This also meant that the Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for ordinary battles. It was only suitable for a desperate fight at the end of the road. Therefore, the moment Chen-Shi drew his sword, the entire sky seemed to darken. 6 golden sword lights surrounded Chen-Shi. The sword hilts were below, and the sword tips were pointing to the sky. Like 6 hungry leeches, they crazily sucked out a huge amount of true yuan from Chen-Shi's body, causing Chen-Shi's aura to become much weaker in an instant. If it wasn't for the fact that he was forcing himself to look calm and composed, everyone present would have mistakenly thought that he was afraid. The 5 divine generals' Dharma treasures arrived with a loud bang. Chen-Shi's sword lights also shot out in all directions. There were only 5 enemies, but there were 6 sword lights. Even if each person had 1 sword, there would still be 1 sword left. Therefore, Chen-Shi shot the 6th sword at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was sitting in the imperial hall. It was impolite to not return the favor. The moment the Xuanpu sword technique appeared, who could compete with it? The vast and continuous sword lights were as strong and hot as the sun. The moment the Dharma treasures of the 5 divine generals came into contact with the sword lights, they immediately trembled and let out a series of wong 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 sorrowful cries. Then, under the shocked expressions of the 5 divine generals, the 5 sword lights showed an unstoppable force, and at the same time, sent the 5 grade 9 spiritual treasures flying. Then they continued to shoot towards their location. Chapter 4:18. Raising Sword Style. Sword raises 6 dragons to conquer the heavens. Great Qian Yuan. Since this place was called Dragon Head Peak, Chunxi was going to trample the dragon head under his feet today. Sword Qi spread for 30,000 miles. Purple Qi and green robe flowing east. On Dragon Head Peak. Ultimate Emperor Palace. Everyone, please follow me. Riding a horse with a sword, singing to the ends of the earth. After the sword radiance shot out, the 5 divine generals cried out in pain in unison. Then, the 5 of them flew back in the direction they came from at an even faster speed. In an instant, everyone was shocked. But what was even more surprising was that, just as the 5 divine generals were pushed back, a golden sword light brazenly pierced through the square, and shot toward the imperial hall where the celestial venerables were with an earth-shattering momentum. At this moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been sitting cross-legged in the palace with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes with a trace of surprise on his face. The sword radiance seemed to have split the void, so much so that when the sword approached the ultimate Emperor Palace, the bottom of the palace began to tremble slightly as if there was an earthquake. A battle between experts happened in the blink of an eye. Yuhuan Tianzuan frowned, and a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. He seemed to be blaming the 5 divine generals for their negligence, so when he saw that the sword radiance was about to shoot into the ultimate Emperor Palace, he immediately raised his hand and summoned the magic treasure that made him famous. The Jade World Glazed Cup. This lamp was in the shape of a tower, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. There was an inextinguishable golden flame in it, known as the Myriad Spirits Ancient E. This magic treasure constantly revolved around Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan, so its name could be said to be known by everyone in the great world. However, although this magic treasure was famous, not many people had seen its true power. After all, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, so how could he casually fight with others? Therefore, when Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan took out the Jade World Glazed Cup, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell, and Heavenly Venerate Xuanjin couldn't help but be surprised. When they looked at the sword light again, even their eyes couldn't help but change. In their perception, although this sword light was coming menacingly, the sword force was not released, so the 2 celestial venerables were unable to accurately judge its power. Then, under the gazes of the 3 celestial venerables, the Jade World Glazed Cup flew out of the Emperor Extreme Palace and collided with the sword beam. Bang! An invisible force swept across the square, and waves of air that were as sharp as steel blades spread out in all directions. The energy hit the restrictions of the Imperial Extreme Palace, and instantly shot out 10,000 rays of divine light. At that moment, the dragon head sang loudly, and multicolored light filled the sky. The 5 divine generals retreated one after another. The Rakshasa Star Sovereign was at a loss. This scene was very much like a forest where gunshots rang out. Frightened birds fluttered about and flew away. The originally orderly square had become noisy because of this. It was as noisy as a market. How dare you? Yuhuan Tianzuan was furious. After a stern shout, he leaped out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. The berserk true essence that had been triggered by the exchange of blows between the 2 of them had also completely disappeared. It was as if nothing had happened. Everyone kept quiet out of fear and returned to their original positions, not daring to make any more noise. There is no such person as you in the world. Who exactly are you? Yuhuan Tianzuan hovered above the square, lowered his head and sized up Chunxi before asking in a deep voice. Hearing this, the corners of Chunxi's mouth curled up slightly. Then he mimicked Yuhuan Tianzuan and slowly flew up from the ground. Only when he was at the same height as Yuhuan Tianzuan did Chunxi reply with a calm expression. This humble one is Chunxi, from the lower realms. As soon as these words came out, everyone, including Yuhuan Tianzuan, was shocked. Tiandu was extremely particular about rules. As long as a celestial master was present, no one was allowed to make the slightest noise. It was precisely because of this that no matter how shocked the divine generals were, they were like wooden men standing in the square in a daze, silent and looking straight ahead. Lower realms? How is that possible? Yuhuan Tianzuan muttered to himself. Then he suddenly opened his right hand and called the Jade Huan glazed cup over again. In the probing exchange just now, Yuhuan Tianzuan was actually at a disadvantage. Of course, it could also be said that Yuhuan Tianzuan did not use his true strength, so Chunxi was lucky enough to take advantage of it. But one had to know that this advantage was not something that anyone could take advantage of. So, this stranger who claimed to be from the lower realms was actually at the celestial master level? How was that possible? The first thought that flashed through Yuhuan Tianzuan's mind was that it was impossible. But then Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and his expression suddenly turned cold. He stared at Chunxi and asked in a deep voice, "You're from the lower realms? Could it be you're the one who destroyed the five-directional sacred palace?" After hearing this, Chunxi's face suddenly stiffened, and he replied somewhat embarrassedly, "It's a misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding." At this time, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanjin also flew out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell heard the conversation between the two, so before Yuhuan Tianzuan could continue asking, he could not help but ask, "In that case, Changli died at your hands?" Changli was a divine general, after all. How could he have died silently in the lower realms? Since this person in front of him had the strength of a heavenly venerable, and at the same time said that he was from the lower realms, in that case, everything made sense. Faced with Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell's criticism, Chunxi suddenly did not know how to answer. And his hesitation. It also indirectly confirmed the guesses of the three Heavenly Venerables. Therefore, the scene that could barely be considered harmonious suddenly became like a gas station on fire. It exploded in an instant. Yuhuan Tianzuan's pupils shrank, and then he muttered in a very strange tone, "So it's you? Destroying the foundation of the divine ancestor, cutting off the path of my heavenly capital. Changli Qinghuan Baihong, Xuexiang, and my son Wuxia." The moment he mentioned the two words Wuxia, Yuhuan Tianzuan clearly paused for a moment. Then an uncontrollable anger flashed in his eyes. In a moment of agitation, Yuhuan Tianzuan no longer had the sage-like aura of the past. He was like an enraged lion. He bared his teeth, and his beard and hair stood on end. "You committed all kinds of monstrous crimes in the lower realms, and today you actually dare to come to my Dragon Head Peak to cause trouble? Do you really think that there's no one in my heavenly capital? Hateful. Hateful. Since you're bent on courting death, this old man will make an exception today and send you on your way. You little thief. Hand over your life." Before he finished speaking, the jade world glazed cup in Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand was like a meteor, drawing a streak of light in the air, and then ruthlessly smashed towards Chunxi. Chapter 419. If emotions could be expressed in reality, then Chunxi would definitely send countless black question marks to Yuhuan Tianzuan. What was going on? Why was the development of things completely different from what he had imagined? Chunxi originally thought that as long as he displayed the strength of a heavenly venerable, Tiandu would give him a high standard of reception. Who would have thought, after he displayed his strength, before he could even say a few words, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly flipped the table and turned hostile. In a rage, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly smashed the jade huan glazed cup heavily at Chunxi. And at this time, this treasure that was famous in Tiandu, just now, it fully displayed its true power to the world. Glazed hellfire, a sky lantern, burning to the 8 wastelands, 10,000 spirits ancient E. The moment the jade huan glazed cup flew out, this magic treasure was like a Kongming lantern that had been ignited, floating toward Chunxi with raging flames. As the glazed cup got closer and closer to Chunxi's position, the fire was so big that it could be said to be burning the prairie and the sky. Because Dragon Head Peak was protected by the array, the fire did not rush out of the array, but raged and burned crazily inside the array. As a result, many Star Lords with lower cultivation were scared out of their wits on the spot, and could only shrink in the corner of the square and tremble. But what made people feel strange was, the raging flames filled the sky and swept through the square at the same time. The raging flames attached to everyone, but they could not feel the slightest bit of heat from it, as if the monstrous flames were just an illusion. Seeing this, everyone immediately felt a lot more at ease, so they all turned to look at the unlucky intruder. Where did this guy come from? He could actually make Yuhuan Tianzuan disregard his status and angrily teach him a lesson. Unlike the previous probing exchange, Yuhuan Tianzuan attacked with all his strength this time. So the moment Chen-Shi saw the glazed cup smashing toward him, his brows immediately furrowed tightly. To be honest, Chen-Shi didn't expect Yuhuan Tianzuan to be so aggressive. Although he had indeed caused a lot of trouble for Heaven Capital when he was on Earth, it was all out of self-defense, so Chen-Shi had always felt that. As long as he could have a good talk with Tiandu, there would still be room for mediation. However, Chen-Shi's idea was good. However, the other party didn't listen to him and came at him aggressively. They didn't even give him a chance to explain. What happened? You've become a victim? The life and death of the love of my life is uncertain. My beloved daughter is still young and has no one to rely on. I went through a lot of hardships to return to Earth, but I didn't expect that after a few days of happiness, I would end up being separated from my family. How could Chen-Shi accept this? All of this was because of these damned ancient cultivators. Thinking of this, even though Chen-Shi had experienced 200 years of mental toughening in the dark space, at this moment, a monstrous hatred rose in his heart. So the moment he saw the jade glazed cup flying over, Chen-Shi immediately waved the godly sword Dharma power in his hand and pointed the sword at Yuhuan Tianzuan. At the same time he shouted sternly, I didn't want to be enemies with Heaven Capital. But you just had to be so aggressive. Heaven Capital, Heavenly Master. Using your name to shout so loudly. Am I really afraid of you? At the same time, the godly sword Dharma power in Chen-Shi's hand also danced. The long sword swept across the sky, stirring up a breeze like a ribbon. Strand after strand, winding around Chen-Shi's body. The breeze blew the ends of his hair, and also ruffled his clothes. There was no earth-shattering scene, but Chen-Shi's momentum suddenly rose along with the breeze. At the moment when the jade-glazed cup was about to hit him, Chen-Shi waved the long sword in his hand. If the sky was divided into two halves, then one side would be a raging flame, and the other side would be a formless breeze. Mysterious sword formula, changing sword style, windy sky, a gentleman should be virtuous. When the flame met the breeze, the sun was just right, and the breeze was not dry. If the great Qianyuan was a strong heavy sword, then windy sky was a soft and long soft sword. The jade-glazed cup was like a fireball, fiercely smashing toward Chen-Shi. However, just as the fireball was about to hit Chen-Shi, an invisible net of sword chi blocked it. Just like the moment when a football was shot into the goal frame, the fireball rolled in the net of sword chi for a while before finally helplessly turning into a wisp of black smoke and completely dissipating in the air. Then the net of sword chi also disappeared into nothingness. This move did not determine the winner or loser. It could be said that they were evenly matched. But it was also because of this heavenly venerable wondrous spell, heavenly venerable Xuanzhen, and countless divine generals and star lords watching the battle in the square. Everyone was shocked by the strength Chen-Shi displayed at this moment. There was actually someone in this world who could fight Yuhuan Tianzuan to a draw. What kind of joke was this? Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to be a little surprised by Chen-Shi's strength. Seeing that his attack had no effect, he suddenly let out a long laugh. Interesting, I haven't fought with anyone for hundreds of years. Mr. Chin, right? Today, this old man will remember your name first. Until the next day, I'll definitely not forget to place a memorial tablet for you in the Imperial Hall. As soon as he finished speaking, Yuhuan Tianzuan's figure flashed, and he charged toward Chen-Shi. It seemed that this heavenly venerable, who was usually high and mighty, was really going to fight to his heart's content with Chen-Shi today. Seeing this, Chen-Shi did not cower in the slightest. So what if you're a heavenly venerable? I'll send you to heaven today. Take another strike from my sword. The jade world glazed cup's flames surged, and the divine general's Dharma idol's sword momentum was endless. The two heavenly venerable cultivators collided fiercely in midair just like that. In an instant, the dissipating true essence was like ice blades and frost, shooting in all directions without distinguishing between friend and foe. Many divine generals could not dodge in time, and were immediately injured by the chi energy, causing countless small scratches to appear on their bodies. These scratches seemed weak and harmless, but in fact, they carried the true essence imprints of Chunxi and Yuhuan Tianzuan. Therefore, the moment the chi energy entered their bodies, these injured divine generals cried out in pain and hurriedly dodged to the side, trying to circulate their energy to force the destructive chi energy out of their bodies. Seeing that the battle had affected many people, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanjin exchanged a look and immediately flew back to Imperial Zenith Hall. They took the initiative to close the protective array of Dragon Head Peak, so that Chunxi and Yuhuan Tianzuan could fight more freely. As long as Yuhuan Tianzuan did not take the initiative to ask for help in this battle, no one could interfere. Although Heaven Capital was strong, it disdained to fight with many people, so it gave Chunxi such a relatively fair battlefield. This was a battle between Heavenly Venerables. It was also a battle between two Heavenly Venerables for their respective dignity. Although Chunxi did not come from the great world, he had successfully proved himself with his strength. He was not weaker than a Heavenly Venerable. Whether I'm wrong or not, I actually have some idea in my heart. You may not have noticed the title of each volume. This is the 4th volume, and the title of this volume is, coincidentally, This Student is Young and in His Prime. Hey, the climax scenes in the past were too short, so can you let me write a longer one this time? Maybe I didn't write well enough, so I felt very bored. Please forgive me, everyone. Be more tolerant of this newbie, so that the next book will be better. 3. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Edition website. Chapter 420. Titles like Yuhuan Tianzuan and Divine Lord of Dawn were just nicknames. Since the strength of the 5 divine generals was equivalent to the Yuanying stage, then the 10 heavenly lords were equivalent to the soul formation stage. The difference between the soul formation stage and the Yuanying stage seemed to be only one stage. But this difference could be said to be the difference between heaven and earth, the difference between clouds and mud. Using the orthodox cultivation heritage of the heavenly jade world as an example, after a cultivator had refined and accumulated their true yuan to a certain extent, they could refine this true yuan to a perfect state and form a golden core. After forming a golden core, the golden core became the foundation of a cultivator's cultivation, and at the same time, it was a hotbed for yuanying. It was like a seed that was scattered in the soil. As long as it was carefully cared for, it would eventually blossom and bear fruit. The flower that blossomed from the golden core. This was the so-called yuanying. Yuanying was formed from the transformation of the golden core. During the entire transformation process, the cultivator's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls would gradually transfer from the heart to the yuanying. As long as the yuanying was not extinguished, the soul would not dissipate. It was also because of this that even if a cultivator's physical body was destroyed during the yuanying stage, they could still use the yuanying to possess another body and obtain a new life. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying soul formation, void. If the Qi refinement stage was the starting point for one to enter the immortal sect, then the foundation establishment and golden core stages were actually just a process of continuous consolidation. Cultivation was also mainly about refining the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and refining one's own true yuan. In fact, even though the golden core stage was called a heavenly man, they had not truly entered the next level of qualitative change. Only after a cultivator had formed yuanying and merged their soul with the yuanying would they truly begin to undergo a second qualitative change. Therefore, the entire process from Qi refinement to golden core was also called transforming essence into Qi. There were no shortcuts on the path of cultivation. It could be said that one had to take one step at a time. This aspect had not been mentioned before because those below the semigod realm were nothing but ants. Divine generals seemed high and mighty, but in Chunxi's eyes, there wasn't much difference between divine generals and celestials. After all, transforming energy into Qi was only the first stage. Only when a cultivator broke through to the yuanying stage and began to explore the threshold of the soul formation stage, would they officially step into the second stage, which was refining qi into spirit. Everything was easy to learn, but difficult to master. Cultivation was no exception. It took Chen Shi 500 years to progress from the qi refinement stage to the soul formation stage. Compared to those old freaks who spent thousands of years to reach the soul formation stage, this cultivation speed was already very terrifying. But even with Chen Shi's outstanding talent for cultivation, after reaching the divine transformation stage, it would be extremely difficult to make further breakthroughs. Because at this level, refining essence into qi was no longer the main point. Refining qi into spirit was the main point. The so-called divinity transformation was to fuse yuanying with the divine soul, allowing it to undergo a qualitative change in form, primordial spirit. Golden core yuanying, primordial spirit. This was a transformation that every cultivator had to go through. Chen Shi's cultivation had already reached the peak of the soul formation stage, only one step away from the insightful emptiness stage. So what he really had to face now was understanding the true meaning of the word void, understanding the first law of heaven and earth, and undergoing another qualitative change. This was something at the next level. Chen Shi had yet to understand it, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was naturally far from it. Let's talk about the Dragon Head Peak first. After Yuhuan Tianzuan charged at Chen Shi, the two immediately engaged in an all-out battle. The intensity of a battle at this level was completely beyond everyone's imagination. There was no concept of planets in the great world. After leaving the floating island, there was only the endless void left. Therefore, after Heavenly Lord Wondrous spells closed the protective array, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately lured Chen Shi into the depths of the void to prevent the battle from reaching the Imperial Zenith Hall. Without the restriction of the venue, the battle instantly became more intense. Heavenly Lord Wondrous spells and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen led a group of divine generals and celestial lords to watch the battle from afar. This battle shocked the entire great world. Almost everyone was watching this battle between heavenly venerables. The glazed glass lamp was blazing with red flames, and the divine general's Dharma idol sword shadows were endless. Astral winds blew, and divine light fluttered. The void trembled, and everyone looked down. If the floating island's protective array formation had not been personally set up by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, it would have been destroyed by the shockwaves from their battle. And as Yuhuan Tianzuan gradually revealed his full strength, Chen Shi also fell into a disadvantage. This was the first time Chen Shi was so passive in a battle since returning to Earth. On one hand, it was because he had not recovered to his peak state. On the other hand, it was entirely because of the jade glazed glass lamp in Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand. In any case, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the 10 heavenly venerables. At the same time, he also had the help of a supreme treasure like the jade glazed glass lamp. Chen Shi was alone, and did not even have a weapon to back him up. Thus, he did not dare to face him head-on. Thus, Chen Shi could only retreat as he fought. He tried to find Yuhuan Tianzuan's weakness in the battle and defeat him in one fell swoop. After a fierce battle, Chen Shi had a rough idea of Yuhuan Tianzuan's strength. Although this old man's cultivation was high, it was obvious that he was slightly inferior. He was about the mid-stage soul formation. It was unknown whether it was because the great world was too peaceful, but Yuhuan Tianzuan's combat experience was clearly inferior to Chen Shi's because he had not experienced blood and fire. Thus, Chen Shi decided to show weakness to his enemy and silently look for an opportunity. If he was strong, he would be strong. If he was tyrannical, he would be tyrannical. When Yuhuan Tianzuan saw that Chen Shi kept retreating, he mistakenly thought that Chen Shi was afraid of fighting. Thus, he did not think much and immediately stepped up his attack, trying to create pressure for Chen Shi. But what Yuhuan Tianzuan did not expect was, just as he threw out the glazed glass lamp again, Chen Shi's eyes suddenly lit up. Found it. All the threats came from the jade glazed glass lamp. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had kept the glazed glass lamp by his side, and personally went forward to fight with Chen Shi might have some scruples. But now, Yuhuan Tianzuan threw out the glazed glass lamp, trying to kill him with a supreme treasure. Such a reckless approach was exactly what Chen Shi wanted to see happen. Thus, Chen Shi immediately held his breath and focused, turning a blind eye to the glazed glass lamp in front of him. Instead, he placed all his attention on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Just as the jade glazed glass lamp was about to hit, Chunxi drew his sword. Changing sword style. Kuan to softness, even movement is hard. One had to know that the profound valley sword art was not a cultivation technique that Chunxi created himself. It was the culmination of a senior expert's lifetime of hard work, and then through the continuous refinement of the sect masters of the Heavenly Evolution Divine Sect. It was a classic that had been handed down for generations. The profound valley sword art was exquisite beyond compare. The sword started from Taiji and divided into yin and yang. The 4 trigrams of yang were Qian Dui Lijun. The 4 trigrams of yin were Sen Kinjen Kuan. The 3 trigrams of yang went against the sword, and the 3 trigrams of yin went with the sword. When released, it covered heaven and earth, and hid yin and yang unfathomable. The 6 trigrams of qi shook heaven and earth, and the 4 trigrams of qi went against the flow. The 4 trigrams of the sun and moon, and the stars changed when moved. Chunxi had pretended to be weak in order to use this killer move. Thus, the moment he drew his sword, the surging true essence immediately affected the qi, and an intense killing intent instantly filled the endless void where the two of them were. Yuhuan Tianzuan sensed that something was wrong, and hurriedly wanted to withdraw the glazed glass lamp. But at this moment, Chunxi had already swung the sword in his hand. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website. .com. Chapter 421. Kuan was the softest, and when it moved, it was the strongest. The moment this sword was swung out, an aurora appeared in the sky of the great world for the first time. Looking at it from afar, it was so beautiful and dazzling, full of colors. Against the endless void, the sword shadows that filled the sky were like colorful ribbons. Ying gently floated toward Yuhuan Tianzuan along with the breeze. Then, the sword shadows collided with the burning jade world glazed cup. But what was surprising was that the sword shadows were like ripples of water. The moment they touched the jade world glazed cup, they immediately split and floated to the sides, as if they were actively making way for the cup. The jade world glazed cup smashed toward Chunxi like a hot knife through butter. Meanwhile, the sword shadows circled around the lamp and gracefully drifted toward heavenly venerable Yuhuan. And this was the opportunity that Chunxi had been waiting for a long time. At the cost of taking a hit from the glazed cup in exchange for a chance to hit Yuhuan Tianzuan with a sword. A sword for a cup. It seemed like there was no difference, but in fact, Chunxi had profited. As the saying went, those who were barefoot were not afraid of those who were wearing shoes. He was an old bachelor. If it was purely a competition of Dharma treasures, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Therefore, the strategy of harming the enemy while harming himself was clearly the best strategy. Therefore, by the time Yuhuan Tianzuan realized something was wrong, it was already too late for him to take back the glazed cup. As a result, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only watch as the sword shadows, which were like huge waves on the sea, came crashing toward him. Boom! With a loud boom, a magnificent scene similar to that of a planet exploding appeared before everyone's eyes. Along with the blazing light produced by the explosion, billions of needle-like rays of light shot into everyone's eyes. These rays of light still contain the true essence of the two celestial venerables, so when they entered their eyes, it gave people a heart-wrenching pain. Among them, those with lower cultivation levels were pierced by the qi on the spot, causing blood to seep out of their eye sockets. Except for the two Empyreans, Miao Fa and Xianzhen, almost everyone was affected by the aftermath of the battle. The surging true yuan wreaked havoc in the boundless void, causing the 120,000 floating islands to tremble. The heavens of the great world. It was going to collapse. Fortunately, every floating island had a protective formation left behind by the divine ancestor, so no matter how intense the battle was, it had very little effect on the residents of the islands. When the strong light began to weaken, everyone turned their heads, wanting to know the result of this battle as soon as possible. As everyone looked over, they could see that heavenly venerable Yu Huan was still facing off against the unknown invader in the distant void. It was as if nothing had happened. It was as if the victor had not been decided yet. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but sigh. This was indeed a battle between heavenly venerables. From the looks of it, it would be impossible to determine the victor in a short period of time. However, just as everyone was looking forward to a more exciting battle scene, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood essence. Then he pointed at Chunxi in horror and sighed. "Where did you come from? It's impossible for an expert like you to appear in the lower realm." Impossible. After this battle, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw Chunxi's true ability. If he didn't have a defensive magic treasure on him, this sword might have left a mark on his body. Even so, this sword still hurt Yuhuan Tianzuan, so much so that his breathing was obviously a little irregular, and the blood in his chest was constantly surging. "Can we sit down and talk now?" Chunxi didn't directly answer Yuhuan Tianzuan's question. After he withdrew the divine general celestial body in his hand, he made an inviting gesture to Yuhuan Tianzuan, giving Yuhuan Tianzuan enough face. After all, unless it was absolutely necessary, Chunxi really didn't want to use force to solve the problem. However, what Chunxi didn't expect was that, after hearing his words, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. Then he suddenly sent a voice transmission to the two heavenly venerables, Miaofa and Xuanzhen. "This thief is tricky. Please lend me a hand and take him down." Hearing this, heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanzhen couldn't help but look at each other. They seemed to have some concerns in their hearts. It was not that they didn't want to help, but because of their status, they felt that it was a little difficult. After all, the three of them were the high and mighty heavenly venerables of the 10 directions. Now they actually wanted to join forces to attack one person. What would the onlookers think? As heavenly venerables, did they have any shame? Seeing that the two of them were hesitating, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately added, "This person's origin is unknown. You have seen the moves that he used just now. His cultivation method seems to be more exquisite than the great clear orthodoxy left behind by the divine ancestor. Therefore, I suspect that he didn't come from the lower realm at all, but from somewhere else. This person has a big secret on him. If he can fall into our hands, it will be a great thing. I ask the two of you to help me capture him. Don't let him escape." At this point, if heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanzhen still didn't express their opinions, they wouldn't be giving Yuhuan Tianzuan any face. Moreover, after watching the battle just now, the two of them had developed a great interest in the Dark Valley sword technique that Chunxi used. Therefore, after looking at each other, they directly rushed toward Chunxi. Anyway, the 10 directions heavens had already lost all their face. What was the point of saying so much nonsense? As long as they captured this person, they could find a random reason to explain it to the onlookers. From the beginning to the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't want to negotiate with Chunxi. On one hand, it was because of Wuxia's death. On the other hand, it was completely because an ordinary man was innocent, but treasuring a jade ring was a crime. Chunxi contended empty-handed against Empyrean Yuhuan, who wielded a supreme treasure. Even so, he still held the upper hand. Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't need to think with his, but to know. Chunxi's cultivation method was definitely stronger than the great clear orthodoxy. How could he not be tempted? Everyone wanted to improve, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was no exception. Therefore, a scene that made everyone's jaws drop happened. 3 heavenly venerables actually attacked that unknown intruder at the same time. Was this a group attack because they couldn't win in a one-on-one fight? Chunxi's condition wasn't very good to begin with. In the battle just now, although he was lucky enough to win against Yuhuan Tianzuan, he had also used up most of his energy. Now that he saw the 3 heavenly venerables charging at him at the same time, Chunxi's first thought was to run. However, as soon as this thought appeared, it was immediately thrown out of his mind. He couldn't run. Yingying was still waiting for him to save her. The soul mirror was in the square outside the Imperial Hall, so, even if he died today, he had to smash that broken mirror first. Alright, the updates were not good enough. Even breathing was wrong. Big bosses, I was wrong. You read a lot, so of course you know the traditional cultivation realms, but some readers don't know. As a salted fish, I really don't dare to promise how much I will update every day. I also don't want to lie to you and paint a big picture for you. In short, under the situation of maintaining daily updates, I'll update as much as I can. Look, I updated early today, so I can save 300 more words there at night. Chapter 422. Deep in the Void. The three heavenly lords no longer cared about their identities and attacked Chunxi with all their might. What was originally a one-on-one duel had now become a three-on-one brawl. It had been a long time since such a grand event had happened in the great world. Everyone hid on their own floating islands and watched as the four heavenly venerables engaged in a chaotic battle. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's cultivation were slightly lower than Yuhuan Tianzuan's. They were about the early stage of the Soul Formation realm. Using the Soul Formation realm as an example, each realm could be roughly divided into the early stage, the middle stage, the late stage, and the peak stage, which was only half a step away from the next realm. Although Chunxi had already stepped into the peak of the Soul Formation realm, he had never recovered to his peak state. Moreover, he did not have any magic treasures on him. Therefore, when he was surrounded by two early-stage soul formation and one mid-stage soul formation, he suddenly felt a little powerless. He could barely deal with the attacks of the three of them, let alone counterattack. Although Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's cultivation were slightly lower, their magic treasures were also extraordinary. The Jade Huan glazed lamp was already powerful enough. However, if Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's 8-view palace lantern and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's coffin lamp were added, these three magic treasures that looked like lanterns combined to form a top-notch treasure that could shake the entire heaven capital. The three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Among them, the Jade Huan glazed lamp was heaven, the 8-view palace lantern was earth, and the coffin lamp was man. Similar to the Jade Huan glazed lamp, there was a flame in the 8-view palace lantern called the sky-burning purple flame. There was also a flame in the coffin lamp called the netherworld ghost flame. If the Jade Huan glazed lamp's myriad spirit ancient was added, then the three most powerful flames in the world were all here. Chunxi did not recognize these three magic treasures, so naturally, he had never heard of the names of these three flames. However, his intuition told him that these three flames must not be touched. Once touched, the three flames would be like maggots in his bones. With his true essence as fuel, they would burn him to ashes. The three of them held the flames in their hands and pressed on. Chunxi defended himself with his sword and retreated as he fought. Every time the two sides clashed, it was like fireworks on New Year's Eve, constantly blooming colorful lights in the void. Every time they clashed, the energy waves produced by their true yuan would constantly crash into the defensive formation of the 120,000 floating islands. For a moment, divine light filled the sky, shaking the void. What a magnificent scene! However, it was also in this seemingly gorgeous scene that a murderous aura was lurking. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause Chunxi to meet a tragic end. Chunxi had no chance of winning. However, he did not run away. Instead, he used all of his strength to fight against the three celestial venerables at the same time. He didn't want to defeat the three of them. Instead, he wanted to use the floating dawn mirror. Since it was for Yingying, it was also for Nian. Thus, without the three celestial venerables noticing, Chunxi gradually pulled the battlefield to the vicinity of Dragon Head Peak. They were so close that the onlookers on the island could even clearly see the different expressions on their faces. The battle lasted for a long time. Chunxi also persisted for a long time. When the three celestial venerables once again released the heaven, earth, and man lanterns at the same time, Chunxi's true essence was obviously insufficient. This caused his sword to be slower by a beat, allowing the three heaven, earth, and man lanterns to successfully reach him. In an instant, true essence surged, and flames burst forth. The three heaven, earth, and man lanterns hit Chunxi's chest at the same time, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Then, like a meteor falling to earth, his entire body was on fire as he fiercely smashed into the square of Dragon Head Peak from the sky. Seeing this, the heavenly generals and star venerables on the square instantly scattered like frightened beasts. What kind of joke was this? These were the three legendary heaven-burning divine fires. Just a little bit of it would probably cripple one's entire life. Thus, after Chen-Shi's entire body was on fire and he heavily smashed into the ground like a meteor, he was the only one left in this huge square in an instant. If not for the protection of the array on the ground, he would probably have smashed a meteor crater on the spot. This person has a shocking cultivation, but unfortunately he fell here today. Although he's our enemy, this old man can't help but feel pity for him. What a pity, what a pity. After retrieving the 8 scenic palace lanterns, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell turned to look at the flames below. Seeing Chen-Shi's aura gradually weakening, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell couldn't help but sigh. Today this person fought 1 against 3. Even if he unfortunately fell, it could be considered a glorious death. Whether friend or foe, just based on this strength alone, this person was enough to win the respect he deserved. While Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell felt sorry for Chen-Shi, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't seem to feel the same way. Because he had fought Chen-Shi the most, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't relax in the slightest even after Chen-Shi had been hit by the 3 lanterns. Instead, he felt that this matter was rather strange. It wasn't that he was very clear about Chen-Shi's strength. It was just a simple intuition. If it weren't for his pride, Yuhuan Tianzuan probably wouldn't have been able to resist the urge to deliver a few more blows. The 3 heavenly venerates flew in the air, each pondering something as they looked at the flames. However, at this moment, Chen-Shi made his move. Originally on the verge of death, he suddenly erupted with an earth-shattering aura, and crawled up from the ground. Before the 3 heavenly venerates could react, Chen-Shi charged directly toward the soul mirror floating in the middle of the square. Oh no, we've been tricked. His target is the soul mirror. It was only now that Yuhuan Tianzuan truly understood Chen-Shi's objective, and he hurriedly hurled the jade-glazed cup in his hand. Yuhuan Tianzuan's reaction was quick enough. However, he was still a beat slower than Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell. As soon as Chen-Shi stood up, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell transmitted his voice to everyone in the square. Everyone, heed my command. Protect the soul mirror. Do not let this person near the soul mirror even if you have to perish. Many of the divine generals were already standing not far away from the soul mirror, so they immediately rushed toward it upon hearing Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's command, and charged toward Chen-Shi with all their might. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Chen-Shi ignored the raging flames on his body, and pounced toward the soul mirror. Dozens of divine generals tried to stop him, but Chen-Shi roared with bloodshot eyes like a crazed beast. Get out of my way! Before he could finish his sentence, the true origin energy that was filled with blood, and Qi was like a huge fan. In an instant, the tens of original infant stage cultivators were sent flying. Back then, Zhao Zilong had entered and exited Changban 7 times. Today, Chen-Shi was going to enter and exit Dragon Head Peak 7 times as well. This was the so-called, where the sword points, the heart points. The road ahead is perilous. Even if there are millions of enemies, I will still press on. Please remember the domain name of this book.com, the mobile version of wondrousbook.com. Chapter 423. Chen-Shi had been secretly observing the situation for a long time. The heaven-bearing effect floating mirror had been suspended in the air above the plaza this entire time, and it was constantly spinning like a top while releasing some kind of unknown energy fluctuations into the outside world. From the looks of it, the soul mirror seemed to be in use right now. Chen-Shi had been imprisoned in the dark space for 200 years, so he had no idea how much time had passed in the outside world. However, seeing that the heavenly venerates and the 5 divine generals were still on Dragon Head Peak, Chen-Shi was extremely hopeful. He could only pray that there was still time. Yingying's soul wouldn't dissipate as long as the soul bridge wasn't completed. As such, he had to take the soul mirror. Even if he couldn't, he had to disrupt the ceremony today. From beginning to end, Chen-Shi's goal had always been resolute. In order to successfully approach the soul mirror, Chen-Shi had even used himself as bait to take on the 3 divine flames head-on. He then pretended to be defeated in order to make the 3 heavenly venerates let their guard down. After all, no one would have thought that everything he was doing was for the soul mirror. On Dragon Head Peak, Chen-Shi charged toward the soul mirror as quickly as he could in his entire life. The 3 heavenly venerates were flying in the sky, and even though they understood his intentions, it was already too late for them to stop him. The only ones who could stop Qin were the 5 divine generals who were closest to the soul mirror. The divine generals naturally had varying cultivation bases. Some were early Yuanying, while others were peak Yuanying. In short, none of them were weaker than Yuanying. However, when Qin was faced with these Yuanying, it was as if he had been injected with stimulants, and he instantly unleashed an astonishing aura that was far more powerful than before. Peak Soul Formation Stage. Blood Essence Ignition. Qin had just consumed a complete nourishment pill refined from the Audimboo flower not long ago. However, this medicinal effect alone was not enough to make up for the loss of blood essence. At best, it could only heal his internal injuries and provide a little help for Qin to condense another drop of blood essence. Qin had already burned 2 drops of blood essence before, so this was the last drop of blood essence in his body. Once this drop of blood essence was completely burned out, Qin would fall into an extremely weak state. If he wasn't careful, he might even die because of this. Did he regret it? He would never regret it. Even if I die, I will not let my heart be covered in dust. One thing to note here is, even though Qin had burned his blood essence and was ready to cut off all means of retreat, he had never thought of dying here, because he still had to go home. He would go back to visit Yingying and take care of Nian. The family of 3 still had a lot of happiness to enjoy. Therefore, he could not die here. Perhaps it was because Qin was almost obsessed with going home, that the aura he unleashed from burning his blood essence was far more powerful than when he was at his peak. In fact, he was even more powerful than the divine monarch Qin of the heavenly jade realm, who wielded the Tianyin divine sword. When a person had a firm belief in their heart, they were invincible. Even though he was surrounded by dozens of nascent soul cultivators, Qin was not the slightest bit afraid. Instead, like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, he sent the dozens of cultivators in front of him flying at the same time. The 3 divine flames were still burning fiercely on his body, but Qin didn't seem to feel any pain at all. His surging true essence was also strangely seeping with blood energy. In this state where blood and fire intertwined, Qin was on the brink of insanity. After using brute force to clear the obstacles in front of him, he abruptly pounced toward the soul mirror. The soul mirror was still spinning in mid-air. Qin could even clearly see the patterns on the mirror. However, just as his fingers were about to touch the soul mirror, this primordial treasure that had saved the primordial immortal cultivators suddenly emitted an extremely dazzling light. Qin didn't even have time to react before this ray of light was like a battering ram, violently sending him flying. Pfft! Qin spat out a mouthful of blood as he crashed heavily to the ground. Qin didn't stop as he looked at the invisible wall in front of him. He immediately flew up as soon as he landed and charged toward the soul mirror again. It was clear that the soul mirror was protected by a spell formation. Under normal circumstances, Qin might have been able to think of a way to break the spell formation. However, in today's situation, he could only rely on brute force to break the spell formation. Without any hesitation, the image of the divine sword appeared in Qin's hand again. It was just a defensive spell formation. Even if the Tai Ching's sacred ancestor was here, Qin would still destroy it. Break! As Qin swung his sword, countless images of the divine sword appeared in the air. The third technique of the Moonlight Sword technique, 10,000 Swords of Origin. An endless stream of sword shadows rose up like a long dragon and crashed into the spell formation protecting the soul mirror. Each sword represented a single collision. When the first sword smashed into the array and shattered, the second sword followed closely behind. One sword after another, it was an endless stream of attacks. The sword shadows would not stop until the spell formation was broken. In the blink of an eye, the spell formation had been struck thousands of times, and each time, it was at the same spot. Qin was trying to break the spell formation with a single point. Even though the spell formation had been set up by the sacred ancestor many years ago, it was beginning to falter in the face of such violent attacks. How could the 3 heavenly venerables allow Qin to break the spell formation so easily? Thus, while Qin was busy hacking at the spell formation, the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man crashed into Qin's back. Bam! With a loud bang, the power of the three lanterns crashed into Chunxi's body. This was the combined attack of three soul formation cultivators. However, Chunxi gritted his teeth and endured it. He was still in the same position as before. The moment the three lanterns hit him, Chunxi did not resist at all. Instead, he used his body as a medium to increase the power of the spell formation by 30%. Break! Aha! Chunxi roared angrily, and a crack appeared in the spell formation protecting the soul mirror. Seeing this, Chunxi couldn't help but smile. He didn't care how serious his injuries were. He swung the sword in his hand and viciously slashed at the damned mirror. The first technique of the Moonlight Sword technique, Hidden Void Sword. After exhausting all of his true essence to slash out this sword strike, Chunxi's heart that had been tightly wounded finally relaxed. At this moment, he was very calm and relaxed, because he really did his best. Chunxi didn't look at the soul mirror again. Instead, he turned around and looked behind him. As he turned around, the shadows of the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man appeared clearly in his eyes, and they became bigger and bigger. Chunxi smiled and didn't resist anymore. He just calmly closed his eyes. Ying, I'm sorry. I failed to keep our promise. Nian, I'm sorry. Daddy can't take care of you anymore. The three lanterns came crashing down. However, Chunxi calmly opened his arms and began to recall the happy memories of the past. He was very tired. It was time to rest. The only regret was I might not be able to see you again. I'm sorry, the two women I love the most in my life. There was no end and there was no messy ending. Don't be agitated. Don't be angry. Let's talk nicely. Please remember the domain name of this book.com, the mobile version of this book.com. Chapter 424. On Dragon Head Peak. The array formation protecting the soul mirror was actually set up by the Grand Pure One himself. Although many years had passed and the power of the array was no longer what it used to be, it was not something a peak soul formation cultivator could easily break. Under the state of burning essence blood, if Chunxi was determined to run, the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man would not be able to easily hit him. However, he did not run. Instead, he gritted his teeth and endured the combined attack of the three celestial venerables. He used his body as a medium and successfully transferred the power of the three celestial venerables to the array formation. With the combination of the two, the array formation was immediately broken. Defensive formations generally had a self-healing ability, so even if the formation was broken, this small hole, which was only an inch wide, would quickly heal. At that moment, there was not much time left for Chunxi to react. There were actually only two choices left for him. He could leave decisively before his blood essence was completely burned, and find an opportunity to return to Dragon Head Peak in the future to take revenge. Or he could fight to the death and use this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to destroy the soul mirror in one fell swoop. Chunxi did not know when Heaven Capital would be able to build the soul bridge. If the soul bridge was built quickly, then what should he use to save Ying? Wouldn't everything still be back to square one? Therefore, he chose the second method. Instead of running, he resolutely swung the sword in his hand. He, who was already covered in wounds, completely lost the ability to resist after using all his strength to swing the sword. This was the core of the entire great world, and also the most noble place in Heaven Capital. In addition to the three celestial venerables who were eager to take him down, there were also countless 5 divine generals and Rakshasa starlords watching from the side. Chunxi chose his lover, and gave himself up. After all, the 3 celestial venerables were not wooden dummies. Naturally, they would not give him time to think calmly. When Chunxi decided to swing that sword, the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth and man once again smashed towards him. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover? Human nature could not withstand the test. Perhaps if the scene was different, Chunxi would not necessarily give himself up to save Qin Ruoying. But at least at this moment, he still bravely shouted that, I am willing. Compared to everyone present, Chunxi's cultivation was indeed very high, but he was not at the invincible Vajra level. Without the protection of a magic treasure, how could the combined attack of 3 celestial venerables be so easy to withstand? He had already taken it head-on twice, so when he saw the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man smashing toward him again, Chunshi calmly closed his eyes. The three lanterns came crashing down. Chunshi could even clearly feel a wave of heat hitting his face. After that, the dazzling flames swallowed him up like a ferocious beast from the primordial times. Boom! A huge explosion rang out from the Dragon Head Peak once again, causing the entire floating island to tremble violently. The place where Chunshi was standing suddenly burst into flames. The fire was extremely ferocious. Whether it was the air or the bricks, everything was ignited at the slightest touch. If it weren't for the Imperial Extreme Hall being protected by a grand array, it would have long been turned into ruins by the raging flames. When the surrounding heaven and earth spirit chi had been burned out, a vacuum appeared in the square. The fire filled the line of sight. Yuhuan Tianzuan had been using his divine sense to observe Chunshi's situation. In his perception, Chunshi's aura was getting weaker and weaker, and he estimated that it wouldn't be long before he was completely burned to ashes. Thus, Yuhuan Tianzuan filled the square with soul-summoning banners, as if he had set up an inescapable net. As long as Chunshi's primordial spirit left his body, the soul-summoning banners would directly detain him and leave him for Yuhuan Tianzuan to slowly torture in the future. Without his physical body, no matter how strong Chunshi was, he was just a tiger without teeth and claws. When the time came, wouldn't he be at his mercy? It had to be said that Yuhuan Tianzuan's idea was indeed very good. But he waited for a long time, and even when Chunshi's aura had completely disappeared, he still didn't see Chunshi's primordial spirit fly out of the flames. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately frowned and hurriedly recalled the myriad spirit ancient with the lapis lazuli lamp, then carefully searched the square. The square was surrounded by soul-summoning banners. As long as Chunshi's primordial spirit left his body, it would definitely be captured by the soul-summoning banners. Chunshi was already in a state of exhaustion, so his primordial spirit should be very weak. How could it have silently escaped from under his nose? What's going on? Where is he? Where did his primordial spirit go? After being hit by Chunshi's sword, the soul mirror fell to the ground like a broken mirror, motionless. And where Chunshi had been. At this moment, there was nothing but a charred ground. The three celestial venerables carefully looked around. In the end, it was celestial venerable wondrous spells who broke the silence first. Could it be that his primordial spirit didn't leave his body? Instead, it turned into ashes along with his body? A trace of anger flashed across Yuhuan Tianzuan's face when he heard this. He couldn't help but flick his sleeves. Impossible. This person's cultivation is unparalleled. Does he not understand the principle of sacrificing the rook to save the king? His primordial spirit must be hidden somewhere here. Perhaps he used some secret technique to hide it from us. Generals, listen up. Today, even if we have to turn Dragon Head Peak upside down, we must find that bastard's primordial spirit. Yes, sir. Following Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan's command, the divine generals and star venerates who had been watching from the sidelines all rushed to the plaza and began a vigorous cleaning. He was certain that Chunshi's primordial spirit was still in the array, so he was determined to find Chunshi. In fact, the moment the three lanterns of heaven, earth and man blasted toward Chunshi's figure strangely disappeared. Not only did the three celestial venerables not notice anything strange, but even Chunshi himself didn't notice anything strange. Chunshi closed his eyes and waited for death. The pain he imagined did not come for a long time. When he opened his eyes again, there was only darkness in front of him. Yuhuan Tianzuan was gone. Dragon Head Peak was gone. Even the entire great world was gone. There was only endless darkness in front of him. Chunshi was all too familiar with this kind of darkness. Why am I back here again? Chunshi was startled. Countless thoughts flashing through her mind in an instant. Could it be that he had been in this dark space all this time? He had never left at all? Everything he had experienced before. Was it all an illusion? How could it be? Chunshi instinctively wanted to fly up and take a look. At this moment, he suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain from his body, along with a familiar burning sensation. Thus, Chunxi immediately checked his condition and confirmed that these injuries were caused by the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. In other words, everything he had experienced before was not an illusion. So, did he return to that endless space of darkness? Thinking of this, Chunxi's heart suddenly felt as if stormy waves had been set off. She couldn't figure out what was going on. This place was really too strange. Just as Chunxi was puzzled, a woman's voice suddenly rang in his ears. Do you regret it? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version website. Chapter 425. Do you regret it? In the endless darkness, a woman's voice suddenly rang softly in Chunxi's ears. The woman's voice was gentle and soft, and there seemed to be some sadness and sorrow lingering in it. And it was such a seemingly simple question. In Chunxi's ears, it was no less than thunder in the sky. Who's talking? At this moment, Chunxi was like a cat with its hair standing on end. His body shook violently, and a ring-shaped true origin light pillar suddenly flew out of his body. The light pillar dispelled the darkness, and also calmed Chunxi down a little. Then he focused and held his breath, and began to look around vigilantly. Chunxi was very familiar with this mysterious dark space that had imprisoned him for 200 years. Just like the last time he was here, there was nothing in this place. There was no light, no air, no radiation, no magnetic field. There was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. But the woman's voice just now was so real, as if she was leaning against his ear and whispering softly. For safety reasons, Chunxi immediately released his divine sense, and with himself as the center, he carefully explored the darkness. But in this endless darkness, there was not even a speck of dust, let alone a person who could speak. Could it be that I'm hallucinating? Chunxi was somewhat uncertain. After all, he had experienced too many strange things, and his brain could no longer react. But just as he was feeling puzzled, the woman's voice rang again. Do you regret it? This time, Chunxi finally heard it clearly. He was not hallucinating, and there was really someone leaning against his ear and whispering softly. After confirming that he did not hear wrongly, Chunxi's heart suddenly trembled violently, because he had no idea where the voice came from. It felt as if a female ghost was leaning on his back, asking him if he had eaten dinner today, and he turned around to look for her, but he could not see the female ghost. How could Chunxi not be surprised? There was actually someone in this world who could approach him silently, and he could not sense the other party's presence at all? How was that possible? After all, no matter how severe his injuries were, he was still at the peak of the divine transformation stage. However, he was unable to detect this woman's aura at all. He couldn't even pinpoint the direction of her voice. Who is it? Are you talking to me? Can you show yourself? Chunxi asked her question towards the void. The woman did not answer him. After a while, the woman's voice sounded again. Do you regret it? It was still the same problem. This made Chunxi suddenly realize. The woman's tone was exactly the same as the previous 2 times. He felt that she was like a recorder that could only repeat the same sentence over and over again. Regret what? Do you regret it? I don't understand what you mean. Can you be more specific? Do you regret it? F***CK. Do you regret it? Do you regret it? No matter what Chunxi said, women would always say the same thing. Therefore, Chunxi thought about it seriously. He was a coding farmer, so he was naturally very familiar with mechanical commands. Therefore, Chunxi was very suspicious that this woman should be a reflection, left behind by a senior expert. She did not have the ability to think, and could only follow the program settings mechanically. If the woman's question was the username, then Chunxi's answer was obviously the password. Only by providing the correct password could he successfully log into the account and proceed with the next step. Therefore, when the woman asked again, Chunxi answered decisively, I don't regret it. He originally just wanted to verify his guess. Who would have thought? The moment the words I don't regret it blurted out, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down from the endless dark space. The lightning came extremely quickly. Before Chun-Shi could even react, the lightning had already struck not far in front of him. In front of him was an empty dark void. However, after the lightning struck, it seemed to have struck something and instantly exploded into a large ball of purple flames. The scene in front of him was simply too strange. Chun-Shi subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave, only to find that he could not move his body. At this moment, the ball of purple flames floating in the void slowly drifted toward him. Chun-Shi watched as the flames gradually approached him. He tried his best to break free, but his body seemed to have been separated from his soul, and did not listen to his commands at all. One had to know that he was at the peak of the soul formation stage. At this moment, he was like a puppet that was being manipulated by someone at will. Faced with such a strange situation, Chun-Shi suddenly had a human emotion that had not appeared in hundreds of years: confusion and helplessness. Confusion and uneasiness. Humans were always afraid of things that they did not know, and Chun-Shi was no exception. It was also at this moment that he finally realized how insignificant he was. So what if he was at the soul formation stage? The purple flames were getting closer and closer to Chun-Shi. It was only when they were about to touch him that the purple flames suddenly stopped. Then, under Chun-Shi's dumbfounded expression, a shackled arm covered in scars suddenly stretched out from the flames. First it was the left hand, then the right hand. Like Sadako crawling out of a TV, the person slowly crawled out of the flames along with the clanking sound of the shackles. Perhaps it was because of the spell, but Chun-Shi could not see the person's face at all, so he could only judge based on the slender figure and the high bulging chest. The person in front of him should be a woman. The way the woman appeared was very strange, but what really shocked Chun-Shi was the way the woman was dressed. He saw that her wrists, ankles, neck, waist, abdomen, ribs, and shoulder blades were all locked in shackles. 9 chains thicker than her arms were connected to the shackles, so every time the woman moved, the chains all over her body would jingle nonstop. Her clothes were ragged, and Chun-Shi could even see half of her chest. And the parts of her body that were not covered by clothes were full of terrifying scars. Chun-Shi was stunned. The woman's appearance was completely different from what he had imagined. He originally thought that the other party was some hidden expert, at least at the same level as the Taiching divine ancestor, so she could easily bring him here from the Dragon Head Peak. Who would have thought that this woman was dressed like a prisoner? Chun-Shi stared at the woman in front of him in a daze, and only a blank was left in his mind. And at this moment, the woman who crawled out of the flames directly pressed her blurry face against Chun-Shi's face, and then asked again, "Are you willing?" Chapter 426. Are you willing? Even though the woman's face was only 2 or 3 centimeters away from Chun-Shi, he still couldn't see the woman's face clearly. He only felt that his vision was blurry, and he couldn't even distinguish her facial features. It felt like a thick layer of mosaic. Chun-Shi didn't know what the woman wanted to ask, but he didn't dare to answer. After all, he didn't even know what the woman was asking. What if he answered wrongly? A bank card password would be temporarily frozen if it was entered wrongly 3 times. Not to mention this strange and mysterious woman in front of him. Although the woman was close, Chun-Shi couldn't feel any trace of her existence. There was no body temperature, no breath, no sound, and no smell. Whether it was breath or aura. This woman had none of that. She was like a lifeless, still painting. As long as Chun-Shi closed his eyes, he wouldn't be able to sense the woman's existence. But as soon as he opened his eyes, the woman's blurry face would immediately appear in front of him. Are you willing? Just like before, the woman waited for about 2 minutes. After seeing that Chun-Shi didn't answer, she asked again. Her voice was still so gentle and soft. After Chun-Shi heard this, the pressure in his heart increased. Should he answer? Or should he not answer? Chun-Shi was tied to the ground by the woman. Other than his head, his body was completely out of his control. This stalemate obviously wasn't a good idea. So after Chun-Shi thought about it again and again, he asked tentatively, "Dare I ask? What's your question?" "There's only one question. Are you willing or not? How can I answer that?" Chun-Shi originally only wanted to test her, to see if the woman would still ask questions mechanically like before. But he didn't expect that after the woman listened, Her head suddenly moved slightly, as if she was looking at him up and down. Seeing this, Chunshi suddenly had a guess in his mind. This woman didn't seem to be a simple reflection? Sure enough, after the woman looked at him up and down, she asked the question, "Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover?" "I'm willing." As soon as the woman finished speaking, Chunshi gave the answer decisively. Wasn't this nonsense? If it wasn't for Ying, how could he be easily defeated by 3 heavenly masters? Chunshi could be considered to have walked through the gates of hell. Although he couldn't figure out why he suddenly returned to the dark space, it didn't stop Chunshi from making bold guesses. This must have something to do with this mysterious woman. Since the woman had brought him back from the gates of hell, she probably wasn't just playing with him for fun. Therefore, after much consideration, Chunshi decided to answer the woman's question first. He also wanted to see what strange reaction the woman would have next. However, what Chunshi didn't expect. He gave the answer, but the woman did not respond at all, as if a computer had crashed. Chunshi was depressed. After 2 or 3 minutes, the woman, she slowly raised her right hand and gently placed it on Chunshi's cheek. The arm that was shackled and covered in scars was so real. However, Chunshi didn't feel like he was being touched by a foreign object. This scene was very strange. It was like the sun shining on the arm, and then the shadow of the arm was reflected on Chunshi's face. Chunshi couldn't feel the woman touching him at all. However, his eyes could clearly see that the woman's palm was continuously caressing his face. What's going on? The woman's behavior made Chunshi very uncomfortable. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only watch as he was being molested. He was at the peak of the soul formation stage, but now he was reduced to such a state. It was really sad and lamentable. Since he couldn't resist, he could only endure silently. Chunshi closed his eyes with a numb expression, but his mind was working quickly. Everything in front of him was too strange. Even with his experience, he couldn't figure out what kind of existence this woman was. This scene was very similar to how he treated his sister-in-law in the past. Didn't Qin Xueqing, who was still an ordinary warrior, also let Chunshi do whatever he wanted? The peak strength did not understand the world of the soul formation stage. Just like the soul formation stage did not understand the world of the void realm. Even when facing his master, Chunshi didn't feel so lost. So it was obvious. This mysterious woman in front of him, she might not just be a void realm expert. Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but open his eyes and keep looking at the woman in front of him. He was trying to find a secret from the woman. But at this moment, in the depths of the endless void, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down. The moment the lightning flashed, not only was Chunshi shocked, but even the woman seemed to be shocked. The woman hurriedly turned her head to look, and the chains on her body suddenly made a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. Then, Chunshi's divine sense seemed to have been electrified, and he finally detected a trace of vital essence fluctuation in the depths of the void. This fluctuation was extremely violent, and it could be said to be, the sky fell and the earth cracked. It was earth-shattering. The first bolt of lightning had just disappeared, and it was followed by another bolt of lightning. One bolt after another, and it didn't stop at all. In just a few breaths, there were hundreds and thousands of bolts of lightning striking the depths of the void. The bright light of the lightning was particularly dazzling in the darkness. In each bolt of lightning, there seemed to be a huge wave of vital essence fluctuation. Chunshi had never seen such an exaggerated wave of vital essence fluctuation, and he only felt that he was so small in front of this wave of energy. It was as panicked as an ordinary person facing the brilliant power of heaven. There was a great terror in the depths of the void. It was like a puppy facing a tiger, or a grass snake facing a dragon. The strong pressure brought about by the difference in realm almost made Chunshi breathless. Pressure was a very mysterious thing. Here was an example. When Chunshi faced a group of martial artists on Earth who didn't know anything, as long as he deliberately showed a trace of hostility, the other party would be so scared that they would piss their pants, and probably not even be able to stand properly. This was pressure. This special phenomenon would only occur when there was an absolute difference in realm between two people. It came from the instinct of life, So even immortal cultivators were no exception. Even though Chun-Shi had stayed in the heavenly jade world for a whole 500 years, he had never seen such a strong pressure. This big shot who suddenly appeared in the depths of the void. Was he just at the insightful void realm? Even if someone said that he was a tribulation true immortal, Chun-Shi would still believe it. And while Chun-Shi was struggling to resist the strong pressure, the chains on the woman's body suddenly tightened, and an unknown force was trying to pull her back into the purple flame. The woman tried to struggle, but the 9 chains on her body seemed to be electrified. The more she struggled, the more pain the chains would bring her. Finally, the woman couldn't hold on any longer. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the purple flame by the chains, the woman suddenly stretched out her right hand, and then pointed at Chun-Shi's forehead. Chapter 427. In the depths of the void, dazzling lightning flashed one after another. Although there was no sound of thunder, every time the lightning flashed, it would set off a huge wave of vital essence. A strong pressure kept surging from the darkness. Chun-Shi was in the middle of this pressure. He only felt that he was now like a small sampan floating in the sea, and could be crushed into powder by the stormy waves at any time. Chun-Shi struggled against the invisible pressure from the depths of the void. The woman struggled against the 9 chains on her body. There seemed to be an unknown power in the purple flame, and it was this power that restrained the mysterious woman in front of him. The woman struggled frantically, but these 9 chains seemed to be wrapped around the capstan of an ancient city gate. Every time the capstan turned, the chains would tighten inch by inch toward the purple flame. Purple flame, azure lightning. The mysterious woman, 9 chains. Everything looked so strange. But the really strange thing was, no matter how shocking the scene in front of Chun-Shi was, he did not hear any strange sounds. Except for the occasional clanging of the chains, Chun-Shi could not hear any sound. The dark space was still so quiet. Even if the woman seemed to be howling at the sky, Chun-Shi did not hear any sound she made. It was as if he was deaf. Apart from that strong pressure, even his divine sense could not detect any unusual fluctuations. What was happening in front of him? It was completely beyond the scope of Chun-Shi's understanding. The lightning flashed faster and faster, and the purple flame grew stronger and stronger. The woman was gradually unable to hold on. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the flame, the woman's right index finger suddenly pointed between Chun-Shi's eyebrows. At that moment, Chun-Shi suddenly felt a bone-piercing chill. It was as if his eyebrows had suddenly touched a piece of ice. It was so cold that he could not help but shiver. Then Chun-Shi did not even have time to react. The past events of his life rushed to his mind like a tide, and appeared in front of him one by one. It was like a movie that started rewinding at 32 times the speed of the movie when the ending was clearly shown. From Longzhou Peak to Diyu Island, from Shangjing to Zhonghai, from Tianxian to Earth. Chun-Shi also reverted from Soul Formation to Yuanying, then to Golden Core and Foundation Establishment, and finally back to being an ordinary person. The timeline was reversed, and the past was still vivid in his mind. Chun-Shi was like a spectator sitting in front of the TV, watching his life in a daze. Soon, the movie returned to the beginning. It was the scene when he worked overtime until late at night and couldn't get a taxi, so he could only run home in the rain. A bolt of lightning struck down. The image stopped abruptly. "It's you." He turned around and looked at her with a gentle gaze. However, in the blink of an eye, his thoughts had already turned 1,000 times. Chun-Shi gaped at the mysterious woman in front of him. He had thousands of questions in his heart, but before he could ask, the woman was dragged back into the flames by the chains. And the moment the woman entered the flames, she seemed to have heard Chun-Shi's voice, so a faint smile appeared on her originally pained face. Although Chun-Shi couldn't see the woman's face, he could clearly feel that the woman seemed to be smiling at him. Finally, the woman's figure was swallowed by the purple flames. The lightning in the distance disappeared in a flash. After the purple flames fluttered for a moment, they instantly disappeared like fireworks. And as the flames went out, the pressure that came from the depths of the void also slowly faded. Chun-Shi was like a spectator, staring blankly as the darkness enveloped him again. Everything returned to silence. He could finally move again. Huff, huff, huff. As soon as he was free, Chunxi couldn't help but start to pant heavily. Although the strong pressure had disappeared, he still hadn't recovered from the fear. Chunxi forced himself to calm down a little, then sat cross-legged in the void. And at this moment, Chunxi suddenly realized that his injuries had healed, and the true origin in his body was abundant, almost at the peak. What was going on? Could it be that the woman cured him before she left? Thinking of this, Chunxi couldn't help but be shocked. And he suddenly had an illusion that he was trapped in a deadly illusion. Illusion attacks the heart, and attacking the heart was the most important thing. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally there was no reference. After Chunxi's strength recovered, everything seemed to return to the moment when he opened the gate of heaven with his sword and fell into the dark space. So he couldn't help but wonder if he had fallen into some kind of illusion again. Everything that he had experienced before. Was it all just an illusion? This guess was actually very reasonable. After all, illusion arrays were usually more terrifying than killing arrays. However, Chunxi immediately rejected this guess. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The pressure was so real, and the woman's existence was so real. No illusion could be so realistic, so everything that he had experienced just now was definitely real. Chunxi had encountered the insightful void before, because his master was at the insightful void. And Chunxi had been lucky enough to see the Dao integration above the insightful void. However, even a Dao integration stage senior wouldn't be able to exert such terrifying pressure on him. So the great terror that was emitting such a strong pressure in the depths of the void was definitely not at the insightful void stage, and might even surpass the Dao integration and reach the legendary tribulation bath. Immortal cultivation, immortal cultivation. This was the real immortal. Chunxi didn't sense any aura from the woman, but just based on the 9 chains on her body and the move she showed before she left, Chunxi had reason to believe that this woman should be at the same level as that great terror. Moreover, this mysterious woman seemed to have an inexplicable kindness toward him. Coupled with her last finger, Chunxi instantly had a guess in his heart. Could it be the reason why he went to the heavenly jade world for no reason? Everything was because of this mysterious woman just now. Chunxi's heart was filled with questions. But no matter how hard he racked his brains, he still couldn't figure out the reason. There were still too few clues. One had to know that this was an important figure that only existed in myths and legends. And he was lucky enough to come into close contact with her today. Although he only said a few words, he resisted a strong pressure. But for Chunxi, who was already at the soul formation stage, this kind of experience was very rare. So he immediately sat cross-legged in the void, and began to carefully recall the entire process of the woman's appearance. He tried to gain some experience from it, but he didn't expect that when he sat down for a whole 300 years. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 428. In the Dark Space. Chunxi used a strand of true essence to create a very crude timer, and then he completely went into seclusion. After his previous experience, he didn't dare to waste his true essence at all. Instead, he entered the state of tortoise rest from the beginning, and kept thinking about everything he just saw in his mind. The reason why the woman didn't have any aura on her was that she had an inexplicable kindness toward Chunxi from the beginning, so she deliberately restrained her aura. If the woman was a prisoner, then the great terror that appeared later was obviously the prison guard guarding the prisoner. These were 2 great figures who had the ability to reach the heavens and penetrate the earth. Chunxi couldn't figure it out, so he focused all his energy on himself. And what he just experienced also made Chunxi realize for the first time that soul formation was too weak. So weak that even if he came to Heaven Capital, he couldn't get the soul mirror and save Ying. He was so weak that he could only tremble and be at a loss under the terrifying pressure of others. Chunxi really didn't like this feeling. So he wanted to use this opportunity to get close to the 2 great figures to break through to the insightful emptiness realm in one go. Strength was always relative. In the heavenly jade world, he was the Dawn Divine Lord who oversaw a region. On earth he was a god, who was above ordinary people. But in Heaven Capital, he found that he couldn't deal with the siege of the 10 celestial venerables and 5 divine generals by himself. As for the great terror of the mysterious woman, she was a terrifying existence that Chunshi didn't even dare to think about before. The comfortable life made Chunshi gradually forget the first rule, which was natural selection, survival of the fittest. Chunshi had a monthly salary of more than 10,000, and his life in a small county was too comfortable. But for big cities like Shangjing and Zhonghai, what was more than 10,000 a month? To put it bluntly, in fact, he had lowered his own level, which was why he was able to live a carefree life. You have your pursuits and I have my choices. So Chunshi's previous idea wasn't wrong. His mistake was, the development and progress of society would not stop because of a single person. Following the birth of a child, the price of housing skyrocketed. Even if they were hiding in a small county town with a monthly income of more than 10,000, they began to struggle to make ends meet. When Chunshi could no longer protect his family with his current strength, that would be when he made a grave mistake. Chunshi realized his mistake, which was why he was so eager to break through to the insightful emptiness realm. It was the same as when he was eager to break through to the divine transformation realm and step on the path home. Fortunately, as long as a man was willing to work hard, it was never too late. Rin Jingfei founded Huawei at the age of 43. Zhong Qingho founded Waha at the age of 44. Then there was Colonel Sanders of the United States, who didn't even start KFC until he was 66. I was once dressed in fine clothes and riding a horse, young and frivolous. Now he's working diligently, and a great talent is a late success. While Chunshi was trying his best to comprehend the true meaning of the word void in the dark space, the little fellow was also gradually adapting to her new life, without the company of her parents. As usual, the little fellow made many video calls to Chunshi every day. For this reason, Wu Lian even specially invited a child psychologist from the capital university to deal with the little fellow's overflowing yearning at any time. The little fellow was like Truman in the movie The Truman Show, living in a fairy tale world that Wu Lian carefully created for her. She gradually got used to video calls with her father, and also gradually got used to her mother's deep sleep. But unfortunately, communication through video calls couldn't compare to the company of real people after all. When the child no longer cried and insisted that her father come home, it meant that her heart had begun to close up. As soon as the video call ended, the smile on the little fellow's face would visibly diminish. She no longer liked new toys, and she no longer clamored to play in the ice rink. If the two brothers didn't come to the courtyard to play with her every day, rain or shine, her entire childhood would probably be much dimmer. Toys, cartoons, Big Cat, and the two brothers had already formed the entire content of the little fellow's life. Grandpa was very good to her. Although Grandpa was often in a daze alone and accidentally neglected her existence, the little fellow could still feel Grandpa's deep care for her in her heart. But this care, it was more like the feeling that Aunt Zhang once gave her, rather than the feeling that her parents once gave her. Only when one once had something would one know what it meant to lose it. She began to like holding her phone in a daze in the room alone. Because she grew up, she naturally began to have troubles. Time flew by. It was a new year. Aunt Zhang was very puzzled as to why Chunshi didn't call her this year. So as soon as the spring festival was over, the old lady took the initiative to call Chunshi. Unexpectedly, the old lady was fooled by Wang Chuanjiu, saying that Chunshi and his family were traveling abroad and wouldn't be back for a long time. Aunt Zhang naturally believed this, so after a series of instructions on the phone, she completely dispelled the idea of visiting the little fellow in Beijing. Even a snail would leave a white mark when it crawled past, let alone a person. Chunshi's sudden disappearance also completely shattered the network of contacts he had built before. Of course, for him, this kind of network was actually dispensable. Chapter 429. Nian was 6 years old. Without the company of her parents, the boring time seemed to pass faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the little girl had already graduated from Donghuimen kindergarten. It was time for her to go to primary school, August 30th, reporting day. Early in the morning, after Qin Yongyan helped the little girl wash up, the two of them got on the bus and then went to the primary school affiliated to Capital University, located near Zhuanwoman. This was the growth path that Chunxi had planned for the little girl a long time ago. Therefore, after Nianyan graduated from Donghuimen Kindergarten, she didn't even have to go for an interview. She directly got a place to enroll in Capital University affiliated primary school. And because of her, the two brothers naturally easily got two very precious places. Because they had been living with Xia Kaiji recently, the two brothers couldn't report with Nianyan today. They could only arrange to meet her at the reporting office later. Qin Yongyan originally thought that Nianyan would inevitably feel a little scared, and even unwilling to go to school, when she suddenly changed to an unfamiliar environment. Therefore, before they left, Qin Yongyan was actually mentally prepared for a tough battle. But what he never expected was, after Nianyan walked into this unfamiliar school, her face didn't have the usual fear and uneasiness that was commonly seen on other children. Instead, it was like she was touring a park. While she walked slowly to the reporting office, her eyes were constantly looking at the classmates who passed by her. To be honest, with her calm appearance, she didn't look like a first-grade child who had just entered school at all. Instead, she looked more like a 4- or 5th-grade child. As one of the top experimental primary schools in the country, the capital-affiliated primary school was not a private school. Therefore, the moment one entered the school, it gave off a feeling of simple elegance with green bricks and gray tiles. There was also a quiet, beautiful, scholarly, and rich cultural atmosphere. This extremely scholarly atmosphere naturally formed a sharp contrast with the childlike atmosphere of the kindergarten. In addition, there was also a fundamental difference between primary school and kindergarten. After all, kindergarten was mainly for the experience of life, while primary school was where the real learning began, such as the timetable, work and rest schedule, exam results, homework, and other nightmarish things would also haunt them from this moment on until they became adults. And it was also from today onwards that Nianyan had a new identity, namely students. Yes, primary school students. Nianyan was assigned to Year 1, Class 2. This class assignment method was randomly assigned by the computer, so after the little fellow sat in the classroom, she waited for a long time but did not see the brothers. Qin Yongyan asked the teacher, and found out that the two brothers had been assigned to Year 1 Class 3 next door. It was a sad story. Qin Yongyan was worried that the little girl would be scared, so he quickly comforted her and promised that he would find a way to put her in the same class as the two brothers. Who would have thought that the little fellow only nodded blankly after hearing this, and did not show any extreme reaction. On the other hand, the two brothers in the next class were so anxious that they were about to cry because they couldn't find Nianyan. The first graders had just graduated from kindergarten, so they more or less carried the habits they had developed in kindergarten. Therefore, the classroom gradually quieted down after the homeroom teacher and the subject teacher arrived. The homeroom teacher first did a simple self-introduction, then began to distribute various kinds of information collection forms to the parents. This was the first time parents and teachers met. The first graders couldn't sit still, so the whole process didn't take very long. After the homeroom teacher took back the forms, she asked the parents to follow her to the multimedia classroom, where the school would officially hold a parent conference for the first graders. During this time, the children in each class had to stay in the classroom and be led by the teacher to play games with them. After the parent conference ended, the children would be familiar with the school environment, and the new students' registration would be completed successfully. They only had to wait for school to officially start the day after tomorrow. There were no problems with the school's arrangements. However, after Qin Yongyan followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, there was a small commotion in Year 1 Class 2. As for the reason for the commotion, it was completely because of an unlucky brat. After the parents followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, the children were guided by the teacher to play with plasticine. Nianyan was wearing a white dress today. Qin Ruoying personally picked it for her. With her rosy cheeks and big watery eyes, she looked very stunning. Yes, just like her mother back then. With such an outstanding appearance and a faint fragrance on her body, the boys in the class would peek at her from time to time from the moment she walked into the classroom. Children at this age still had a vague understanding of gender, and it was more out of curiosity. Beauty was innate because it was determined by genes. Most children would enter the aesthetic sensitivity stage when they were 3 years old. They would even choose colors that they liked, such as red, blue, etc. Therefore, don't think that children couldn't distinguish between beauty and ugliness. Not only did adults like beautiful women, but children also liked beautiful women. Nian was clearly a living beauty. Most children were very obedient, but there were always a few exceptions, which was commonly known as brats. Unfortunately, there was a brat sitting diagonally behind Nian. Although this brat was only 6 years old this year, he was very mischievous. He was not afraid of parents or teachers at all. It seemed that when he was in kindergarten, he was the tyrant of the class. Nian was so cute, so the brat naturally had his eyes on her from the beginning. Of course, this brat's heart was not as dirty and dark as the adults. He just instinctively wanted to get close to Nian. However, the way he approached others was completely unacceptable to ordinary people. This brat took advantage of the time when the teacher was teaching the other children to play with plasticine to climb to the ground and quietly crawl behind Nian. He wanted to lift Nian's skirt, just like he used to lift other people's skirts. However, just as he held the little girl's skirt tightly with a smirk on his face, the little girl who was seriously playing with the plasticine seemed to have been prepared. She suddenly stood up from her seat and slapped him directly in the face. Slap. Nian did not use much strength, but the crisp sound of the slap alarmed the entire classroom. The brat was stunned. He was stunned for a long time. When he saw the teacher rush over, the brat's grievance seemed to have found an outlet. He couldn't help but burst into tears. Nian, what are you doing? Chapter 430. Nian. Compared to the recently popular names like Zixuan, Sini, Sahan, and Kursin, the little girl's name seemed particularly ordinary. But because of her outstanding appearance, the teacher remembered this child who was as cute as a porcelain doll at a glance. She didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but most people would discover a strange phenomenon during their school days. And that was, a good-looking girl would usually be the class monitor of the class. Of course, the prerequisite was that the girl had self-respect and self-respect. Perhaps it was because their beautiful appearance gave them more attention, but at the same time, it also gave them more pressure. In addition, girls matured early, so these girls were usually more mature and sensible than ordinary children. Nian's appearance was already very outstanding, and in addition, she was influenced by rich spirit energy all year round. So even if she didn't cultivate, she had a temperament that was far superior to other children her age. Therefore, the moment the teacher saw her, she had already listed the little girl as a candidate for class monitor. If her performance in the future was good and her results could keep up with the rest of the team, this position would obviously be decided internally. But no one would have thought that the little girl who easily gained the approval of all the teachers would beat another child to tears on the first day of school. The naughty child sat on the ground and cried loudly, while Nian stood there and looked at him coldly. Seeing this, the teacher couldn't help but be angry, so she couldn't help but scold her. However, Nian didn't defend herself. Instead, she pursed her lips and looked indifferent. School bullying was a situation that occurred in every school and even every class. As one of the top teachers in the country, the teachers of the capital-affiliated primary school naturally did a lot of research in this area. The naughty child deliberately cried loudly, hoping that the teacher would be biased towards him. Fortunately, the teacher wasn't a fool, so before confirming the truth, she didn't dare to make a conclusion. Seeing that Nian didn't continue to beat him, the teacher came between the two children and patiently asked the reason. In fact, when the teacher realized that the naughty child wasn't in his seat, she had a guess in her heart. So, she immediately relaxed her expression and tried to communicate with the little girl. Nian, tell me, why did you bully your classmate? Hearing this, the little girl pouted and replied stiffly, Daddy said that no one is allowed to lift my skirt. I'm a girl, whoever lifts my skirt is a pervert. Dad said that this is a matter of principle, so I must give him a good thrashing. The little fellow's words were loud and clear, full of righteousness. After hearing this, the teacher didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was right, but how old was this child? How would she know anything about erotic things? It was probably just for fun. Teacher understood the entire process of what had happened. In such a situation, it was wrong to favor either side. The naughty brat had sneakily come over to lift her skirt, but he didn't expect that this time he would lift a steel plate. So she raised her hand and gave him a slap. It was wrong to lift her skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit her. Therefore, after the teacher pointed out the two children's mistakes, she asked them to apologize to each other. Chen Nian, if you encounter such a situation in the future, you can tell teacher directly. Teacher will definitely criticize him severely. But you have to remember, you're not allowed to hit anyone in the future, understand? The teacher felt that the nature of hitting someone was worse, so she asked Nian Nian to apologize to the naughty brat first. Unexpectedly, after Nian Nian heard this, she immediately frowned and replied stubbornly, I won't. He's a pervert. I don't want to apologize to a pervert. Perhaps it was because the movie Su Yuan had left a very serious psychological shadow on Chen Shi, so he had always been very concerned about the issue of indecency. Actually, to put it more bluntly, the naughty brat's behavior was indecent. Age wasn't a reason to make a mistake, nor was it an excuse to avoid making a mistake. Scourges were cultivated slowly. If a mistake was made and a random excuse was found to cover it up, there would obviously be more girls who would be unlucky in the future. Why did you not teach your child well? But my child was the one who was hurt. This was a matter of principle. Therefore, Chen Shi's attitude had always been absolutely unforgivable, absolutely unforgiving. Nian Nian had obviously inherited Chen Shi's teachings. Therefore, when she heard that the teacher actually asked her to apologize to the naughty brat, Nian Nian suddenly became confused. Pervert. Shameless. I'm not going to apologize to a pervert. Bah. The little girl's reaction was somewhat out of the teacher's expectations. She called him a pervert here and there, and the last bah deeply hurt the naughty brat who was lying on the ground pretending to be innocent. This was great. Seeing that the whole class was watching the show, the naughty brat who had to bear the name of pervert suddenly felt a little embarrassed. After all, he was still a child. The teacher was busy correcting Nian Nian's mistake, so she didn't notice the naughty brat's thoughts. When the naughty brat saw that everyone seemed to be laughing at him, his mentality instantly exploded. After a loud cry, he ran out of the classroom while crying. Well, this time he was really crying. Seeing this, the teacher quickly chased after him. But this naughty brat ran like a thief, and in a flash he jumped into the multimedia classroom next door. The parents were having a meeting in the multimedia classroom, and this tragic cry immediately attracted everyone's attention. While everyone was still wondering what was going on outside, a rather good-looking young woman directly rushed out of the classroom. Nonsense, as a mother. How could she not know whose child was crying? As expected, as soon as the beautiful young woman went out, she saw the naughty brat who was covering his face and running wildly. Yang Yang! Come here, mommy is here. What's wrong? Who bullied you? Don't cry, tell mommy, mommy will help you. After seeing his mother, not only did the naughty brat not stop crying, but he also cried even more heartbreakingly. The naughty brat's cries echoed in the corridor classroom. As one could imagine, how wronged he must have been. Fortunately, the school didn't officially start today, and in such a big school, there were only freshmen like them, or else where would the school put its face? The parent-teacher conference was forced to be suspended. The principal walked out of the multimedia classroom with a gloomy face. A group of head teachers and head teachers followed behind the principal expressionlessly, but in their hearts, they had already started cursing. Which class was this child from? Was the teacher who took care of this child an idiot? Didn't he know that today was the registration day? The principal had just introduced the school's teaching staff and teaching atmosphere to the parents, but in the end, the other side slapped their faces. The head teachers of each class silently prayed in their hearts, only hoping that this unlucky child was not from their class. The principal, teachers, parents. A group of people walked out of the multimedia classroom in such a grandiose manner. When the head teacher of Year 1 Class 2 realized that this naughty brat was actually from Year 1 Class 2, she fell silent. The head teachers of the other classes suddenly had a very strange expression on their faces. Hee hee, there was a good show to watch. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful book mobile version website. .com. Chapter 431. The naughty child cried until the sky darkened. No matter what the parents asked him, he just pointed at the classroom and kept sobbing. Looking at his pitiful appearance, those who didn't know would think that he had been wronged. It was normal for first graders to cry. It shouldn't have caused such a big commotion. Unfortunately, the child's mother wasn't someone to be trifled with. The teacher who rushed out tried to calm the situation, but the beautiful young woman didn't listen to her at all. Seeing that the child couldn't stop crying, the young woman took her son directly to the door of the multimedia classroom. Then, she squatted at the door and slowly coaxed her son. From the beginning to the end, she didn't say a word to the teacher. Instead, she silently comforted her son. And this was actually the highest level of a shrew. She didn't make a fuss, she didn't hang herself, she just looked on coldly and laughed. She didn't even do anything hysterical or embarrassing. She just silently stood at the door with the child. At that moment, all the teachers present, including the principal, couldn't help but feel a little scared. They instantly understood that today's matter might not be easy to resolve. The naughty child's crying interrupted the meeting, and at the same time, it caused a burst of discussion among the parents. The young woman didn't do anything extreme, and the school couldn't forcibly take the crying child away. Therefore, seeing that the head of the year department couldn't communicate with her, the principal could only temporarily stop the meeting. He personally promised the young woman that he would give her a satisfactory explanation after he found out the reason. After the young woman heard the principal's promise, she whispered a few words in the naughty child's ear. It was strange. The naughty child who couldn't be coaxed heard his mother's words, and his originally tragic cries suddenly became sobbing. Is this an Oscar-winning actor? Seeing this, the teachers couldn't help but silently complain in their hearts. Everyone was an adult, so how could they not understand the twists and turns in the story? This woman knew how to use the rules, and at the same time, she understood the principle of the weak defeating the strong. It was obvious how angry the principal was to be involved in such a mess on the first day of school. Therefore, after the principal gave the task of presiding over the meeting to the head of the year department, he quickly walked out of the multimedia classroom with the class teachers. When the parents saw this, they ignored the age director's advice and hurriedly followed the principal out of the multimedia classroom. After confirming that the troublemaker wasn't their child, the parents returned to their seats and discussed the aftermath of the incident. It's so hard to get a place in the capital-affiliated primary school. Looks like there aren't any left. I wonder whose unlucky child this is. Won't father and mother be angered to death this time? After all, today was not even the first day of school. It was just a reporting day, but it turned out to be such a big deal. If nothing unexpected happened, this child who hit someone would probably be treated as an example and expelled directly by the school. Of course, according to the rules of the 9-year compulsory education, schools could not directly expel or dissuade students, but the school could give the students holidays. Other than making things difficult for them, the school had many other ways to make students transfer schools voluntarily. Moreover, today was only the registration day, and the information had not yet been submitted for review. The principal could delete the child's information at any time. Perhaps it was out of sympathy for the loss of a rabbit, but the group of parents immediately decided to repeatedly educate their children in the future. They must not make any mistakes and be expelled from school. Back to the principal. After the group of people arrived at the door of Year 1 Class 2's classroom, they did not directly enter the classroom. Instead, they asked the teacher to go in and call out the troublemaker. Nian Nian obediently followed the teacher out of the classroom. As soon as they stepped out of the door, the naughty child who had been crying nonstop looked as if he had seen his father's murderer. He immediately pointed at Nian Nian and shouted excitedly, Mother, it's her. She's the one who hit me. Here. It hurts. After saying that, the naughty child raised his head and signaled his mother to see the palm print on his face. He was a child after all, and his skin was very delicate. Although Nian did not use much strength, this slap was still solid and left a faint mark on his face. The young woman saw the palm print on the child's face, but she did not do anything. Instead, she silently looked at the principal. In this case, the principal naturally had to understand the situation first. Therefore, the teacher immediately went forward to explain. This was the capital's affiliated primary school, and all the children were enrolling on the first day. Naturally, the teacher could not be biased. Therefore, when the principal heard the whole story, he immediately agreed with the way the teacher handled it. The teacher did not do anything wrong. If it were any other school or any other teacher facing this situation, they would have done the same. It was wrong to lift the skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit someone. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with the judgment that the person who hit someone should apologize first, and the troublemaker should apologize later. But the problem now was Nian was like a tortoise who ate a scale today. No matter how the teacher communicated with her, she was determined not to admit that she was wrong. And children, in addition to being particularly prone to crying, actually had another characteristic, and that was, they were especially stubborn. They were even more stubborn than adults. Standing in front of her was the principal, the young woman holding the naughty child's hand, and the teacher in charge of each class. The teacher said one after another to guide the little fellow. As long as she apologized, the principal obviously would not make things difficult for this 6-year-old child. But unfortunately, Nian did not apologize. She even said in front of the principal that she was determined not to apologize again. I'm not apologizing. I'm not wrong. The person who lifted my skirt is a pervert. I'm not apologizing to a pervert. Even though she was surrounded in the middle, she did not show any fear on her face. In fact, it was not just the principal who came today. Even if God came, he would not be able to change her mind. Because this was a matter of principle that Chunxi had repeatedly emphasized to her. Time had smoothed out our edges and corners, and time had eroded our hearts. The 6-year-old Chunyan had not learned to be flexible. Therefore, her father's words were the truth sword in her hand, and also her stubbornness. Even if the whole world said that you were wrong, it was okay. Her father was here. Seeing that the little fellow was still unwilling to admit her mistake, the principal could only sigh deeply in the end. Then he turned to the teacher and asked, "Where are the child's parents? Didn't they come out with us?" Hearing this, the teachers could not help but look at each other. They suddenly knew that things were not good. As expected, seeing that the little fellow's parents did not appear, the principal directly said to the teacher in charge of Year 1 Class 2, "Inform her parents. This kind of child. Our school can't educate her." Didn't I write it wrong before? So, I'll write it according to my idea. What I want to write is about Nian's growth. So I hope you understand. Under the protection of an eagle will never grow up. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens God Emperor mobile version reading website. Chapter 432. This kind of child. Our school can't educate her. Wasn't the meaning of this sentence clear enough? The principal was trying to dissuade the little girl. Although she was only a 6-year-old child, Nian's actions today had already crossed the line. And the worst thing was, no matter how the teacher tried to guide her, Nian was determined not to admit that she was wrong. Under these circumstances, even if the principal wanted to give her a chance to repent, he couldn't find a suitable reason to do so. After all, today was only the first day of school and not the usual day of classes. If she really entered the school, with this stubborn and violent temper of hers, who knew what kind of trouble she would cause in the future? This was a primary school affiliated to the capital, and at the same time, it was also the top public primary school in the country. He couldn't allow a single rat to spoil the entire pot of soup. The principal repeatedly deliberated for a long time. In the end, he made this seemingly unreasonable decision. Of course, the principal was actually very clear in his heart. For a 6-year-old child, Her worldview had yet to be stabilized, so the child's every action was actually carried out according to the daily teachings of the parents. Rather than saying that it was the child's fault, it was more accurate to say that it was the parents' fault, but in the end, the child was the one to take the blame. Nian happened to bump into the muzzle of the gun, and because of this, she became the target of the principal's punishment. At this moment, no teacher spoke up to plead for her, and even the homeroom teacher of Year 1 Class 2 was silent. Seeing this, the young woman couldn't help but reveal a trace of satisfaction on her face. She gently touched the naughty child's face, as if hinting to her son, "Look, mother is standing up for you." Seeing that the principal had spoken, the homeroom teacher could only sigh deeply, then turned around and walked to the multimedia classroom, preparing to inform Chen Yan's parents to take the child away. But just as she was about to turn around, Qin Yongyan, who hadn't shown his face all this time, suddenly appeared behind her. Qin Yongyan had already stepped into the diviner realm. Although this level of cultivation couldn't achieve eternal youth, they could still maintain their appearance for decades. In order to not appear too different, Qin Yongyan deliberately made himself look a lot older, thus giving the impression that he was about 40 or 50 years old. With his cultivation level, he naturally knew what was going on outside. Therefore, as soon as he appeared, Qin Yongyan directly walked past the head teacher and came to the little girl. "Nian, come. Grandpa will take you home." He gently held the little fellow in his arms, and with a little force, the little fellow was lifted up by him. At this moment, the right or wrong of this matter was no longer important. Qin Yongyan respected Chun Xi's teaching methods, so as long as Nian believed that she was not wrong, then she really was not wrong. The one who was wrong was the brat and that beautiful woman. At the same time, it was also the school's education method. Isn't it just a small school affiliated to the capital? What's the big deal? Was this the only school in Wuxia? It's okay, Grandpa will change the school for you. Qin Yongyan didn't even bother to greet the principal. Under the gaze of all the teachers, he carried the little fellow and walked straight to the school gate. The little fellow silently lay in Qin Yongyan's arms. After Qin Yongyan carried her out of the school gate, she couldn't help but look back at the school that had driven her away on her first day. In fact, she felt very wronged. But she didn't cry from beginning to end, because her father once said, "You can't cry when you're wronged. If you cry, it means you've lost." There's a group of people waiting to see you make a fool of yourself, especially those who have wronged you. The more wronged and sad you are, the happier and more complacent they will be. Qin Yongyan wasn't Chun Xi, so he didn't want to lower himself to the level of these ordinary people. The only solution he could think of was to change the school and environment for Nian. Therefore, after walking out of the school gate, Qin Yongyan took out his phone and called Wang Chuanju. Wang Chuanju was presiding over a department meeting, so she wouldn't have answered the phone. But she remembered that Qin Yongyan was an antique who didn't even use a cell phone. Something important must have happened if he suddenly called. Therefore, Wang Chuanju immediately stopped the meeting and walked out of the conference room with her phone. "Ah, what? Transfer Nian. The capital-affiliated primary school is close to home, and the quality of education is good. Why would she want to transfer schools?" Wang Chuanju felt that Qin Yongyan's request was very strange, so she repeatedly asked over the phone. Qin Yongyan didn't want to say at first, but he couldn't stand her bombardment of questions, so he had to roughly explain the situation. But unexpectedly, after hearing the story, Wang Chuanju exploded on the spot. Even though they were separated by a door, her roar could be heard clearly in the conference room. "What? Nian was expelled? Who did it? Don't go, I'll be right there." "What do you mean I don't care? My granddaughter was bullied, and you want me to do nothing?" "Brother, I don't want to criticize you, but you really need to change your good temper. It's a good thing that Chunxi isn't at home now. Otherwise, with his daughter's temper, wouldn't he tear down the school today?" "Okay, don't say any more, I'll be right there." It had to be said that Wang Chuanju was really efficient. In the time it took Qin Yongyan and the little girl to wait for the bus, she had already rushed over with a group of people. As soon as they got off the bus, Wang Chuanju directly squatted in front of the little girl. then gently hugged her into her arms and patiently asked, "Nian Nian, tell Grandma, what's going on today?" Perhaps it was because Wang Chuanju was a woman. When the little girl saw her, she immediately pouted and said coquettishly, "Dad said that I'll hit whoever lifts my skirt. But the teacher said that I did something wrong and wanted me to apologize to him." Speaking of this, the little girl suddenly paused, and for the first time, an expression of grievance and sadness appeared on her face. In fact, when everyone said that she was wrong, how could she not have doubted her own actions? After all, she was not some stubborn brat. Although Grandpa said that she did nothing wrong, the little girl still seemed to have some self-doubt, so she could not help but ask doubtfully, "Grandma, was I really wrong?" The so-called right and wrong itself was a subjective meaning. Perhaps as long as Wang Chuanju said that she was wrong, the little girl would immediately change her mind and take the initiative to apologize to the brat. She was very sensible. And it was precisely because she was sensible that she would not be easily persuaded by outsiders. Qin Yongyan was not an outsider, and Wang Chuanju was not an outsider either. So as long as one of them said that she was wrong, the little girl would seriously reflect on it. Fortunately, Wang Chuanju did not give her a chance to reflect, but directly carried her up and strode towards the school gate. "What wrong? Your grandpa has a soft temper, likes to settle everything peacefully, and is not easily calculative with others. Because of this character, he used to be bullied in the village, so don't learn from him. If you want to learn, learn from your father. Didn't your father often say this? We don't cause trouble, but we're not afraid of trouble either. Whether it's at school or elsewhere, in short, if you fall behind, you'll be beaten. If you're weak, you'll be bullied. So Nian Nian, you must remember. In the future, if anyone dares to lift your skirt, you'll beat him hard for me. Because not only did your father say this, but your grandma also said this." With Wang Chuanju's encouragement, the doubts in the little girl's heart suddenly disappeared, and a smile finally appeared on her face again. Looking at the valiant and high-spirited Wang Chuanju striding into the school gate, Qin Yongyan could only helplessly shake his head at the side. No wonder Qin Xueqing's character was so tough. Wasn't it all because of Wang Chuanju's teaching? The two sisters of the Qin family, Ruo Ying and Lin Qing. One was gentle like water. One was as strong as fire. Who knew? Who would Nian Nian look more like when she grew up? Please remember the domain name of the book. Chapter 433. With Wang Chuanju's strong appearance, there was a shocking turn of events. When the principal saw her take out a black ID, he immediately squeezed out a sincere smile on his face. It couldn't be helped. This was the world of adults. Their edges and corners had been smoothed out by time, and the corners of their mouths were raised into sophisticated smiles. Wang Chuanju was really too strong. No one knew what she said to the principal, but in a short while, Nian Nian was led back to the classroom by the class teacher with a smile. Children didn't hold grudges, but when the naughty child saw Nian Nian return to her seat as if nothing had happened, he couldn't help but have a flash of fear on his face. It was obvious that the naughty child was really afraid of this new classmate who beat him up at the slightest disagreement. Nian Nian was still young, so she didn't understand what Wang Chuanju's appearance meant. But the beautiful young woman was very clear that she might have kicked an iron plate today. So when she came out of the principal's office, she hurriedly left the school with the naughty child, as if she didn't want to stay here any longer. As Nian Nian returned to her seat, this farce also came to an end. Other than the naughty child being taken away by his mother, it was as if nothing had happened. And Nian Nian, the freshman who dared to beat someone on the first day of registration, became famous because of this battle. Now, not only did the teachers in the school know that her background wasn't ordinary, even the students looked at her differently when they looked at her. After all, in a class, there were also class bullies other than top students. Fame was earned through fighting. The teachers didn't talk about what happened today, and the children were afraid that they would be the next to be beaten. So from today onwards, Nian Nian was already firmly sitting on the throne of Year 1 Class 2. The teachers of each class took the students to tour the school and let the children familiarize themselves with the school environment. After that, the whole process of registration was over. The little guy was confused the whole day. After dinner, when she made a video call to Chunxi, she told her father about it. She didn't expect that after Chunxi heard about it, he repeatedly told her not to hit anyone in the future. As the saying goes, no one knows a son better than his father. Who doesn't know a father better than a son? Children were the closest people to their parents. How could they not be aware of the changes in their parents? Chunxi's previous education had long been deeply ingrained in Nyanyan's mind, so when he suddenly proposed a completely different education concept at this moment, the little fellow immediately felt a little strange. Because these words were obviously in conflict with what Chunxi had said before, and it was also completely different from what Grandma had said. Looking at the lifelike Chunxi in the video, the little girl was at a loss. It was as if an error had occurred when a computer was running. The little guy's brain shut down. The child psychologist did not know the real Chunxi, so he could only guide the little guy in the correct way. But no matter how perfect the imitation was, a fake would always be a fake. Therefore, this seemingly small oversight planted a seed of doubt in the little fellow's heart. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to detect any abnormalities in the short term. But if time passed, by the time the little fellow turned into a little girl, this clumsy lie would probably burst like a bubble. Fortunately, the little fellow was still young. Even if she felt a little strange, she didn't directly question it over the phone. As usual, Chunxi comforted the little fellow, told her a few stories, and coaxed her to sleep. The little fellow nodded. But after hanging up the phone, she didn't seem to be sleepy at all. She turned over and directly leaned against Qin Ruoying. She still felt a little confused, so she leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and told her what she saw and heard today. Unfortunately, her mother was still sleeping quietly. The little fellow blinked and suddenly felt a little cold, so she softly called in the dark, "Big cat." Meow. After hearing her call, the big cat immediately jumped down from the beam and directly got into the little fellow's bed with a few leaps. Feeling the warmth from the big cat, the little guy blinked his eyes and turned to look at the window at the side. Tonight, the moonlight was like water. The moonlight shone through the window on the bedside. The little fellow hugged the big cat tightly and clung to Qin Ruoying. She couldn't help but murmur, "Big cat, where do you think Dad is going?" Meow. "When will he come back?" Meow. "I miss him so much." Perhaps he felt the strong longing in his daughter's heart. Chunxi suddenly woke up from his meditation. Perhaps because he had been meditating for too long this time. The moment he woke up, Chunxi even had the illusion that he was in a courtyard. But then, the endless darkness in front of him made him recognize the reality. Chunxi was still floating in the darkness. Looking at the timer beside him, he found that he had been meditating for as long as 200 years. There was no 60-year cycle in the mountains, and no one knew the year after the winter. Last time, Chunxi was imprisoned for 200 years. When his life was in danger, a light door appeared to save him. Now another 200 years had passed, and the light door still hadn't appeared. In this regard, Chunxi didn't panic at all. In fact, he had already guessed that the light door might be related to the mysterious woman. If he counted the time on Dragon Head Peak, the mysterious woman had actually saved him twice. In the face of such a powerful aura, the residents on the nearest islands couldn't even stand steadily. At this moment, he didn't hide the killing intent in his heart. This killing intent seemed to have substance, and in the end, it turned into an invisible long sword. It soared into the sky and cut through the clouds. The sword pointed to the Dragon Head Peak. Bang, bang, bang. Hundreds of dragon drums sounded at the same time, and the dense drum sounds poured down like a rainstorm. At that moment, even the god generals on duty on the various islands were stunned. But then, they were like cats whose tails had been stepped on, and they couldn't help but let out a long cry. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Enemy attack! In an instant, Everyone was in a panic and the sky shook. Yuhuan Tianzuan was discussing something with the celestial venerables in the Emperor Hall, when they suddenly heard the warning of the 5 divine generals. A trace of surprise flashed across the faces of the celestial venerables. Since they were called the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, there were naturally 10 celestial venerables in Tiandu. Chunxi was lucky last time and just happened to arrive at Dragon Head Peak when the other celestial venerables were patrolling, so he only met the 3 celestial venerables Yuhuan, Miao Fa, and Xianzhen. But today was different. With Yuhuan Tianzuan as the leader, Yujiang, Taihua, Yinghua, and the other celestial venerables were all present at this moment. Therefore, after hearing the divine general's warning, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face darkened on the spot. It must be him. He was lucky enough to escape last time, and now he dares to come back? Does he really think there's no one in Tiandu? Before he finished speaking, Yuhuan Tianzuan summoned the Jade Huan glazed cup, and then suddenly turned into a ray of light, rushing towards the direction of the dragon drum. Seeing this, the 7 celestial venerables who had not experienced the battle on Dragon Head Peak couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. Was there a need to be so excited? The 7 celestial venerables merely watched the battle from afar, and did not personally step forward to fight with Chunxi, so their feelings were naturally not as vivid as those of the 3 celestial venerables present. Chunxi's seemingly casual slash, other than forcing the heaven, earth, and man lanterns to retreat, he had also directly injured the 3 celestial venerables who were related to the lives of the 3 lanterns. How could Yuhuan Tianzuan not be shocked? It wasn't like he hadn't fought with Chunxi before. When he fought Chunxi, who was at the peak of the soul formation stage, he didn't have the upper hand, but it wasn't as if he had no chance of winning. But now, Chunxi was fighting against 3 celestial venerables alone, but he could still easily injure them. How was this possible? At this moment, not only was Yuhuan Tianzuan shocked, but even the 2 celestial venerables, Miao Fa and Xianzhen, were filled with shock and uncertainty. The 3 of them hesitated, and the scene temporarily returned to its original calm. Seeing this, Chunxi wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he slowly flew up until he was at the same height as the 3 celestial venerables. Only then did he speak loudly to everyone present. This humble one is Chunxi. I've already met all of you before, so I don't think I need to introduce myself too much, right? Actually, I've always wanted to sit down and talk with all of you, but you didn't even give me a chance to speak. I originally had no intention of making an enemy out of Tiandu. I just wanted to borrow the sky-bearing impersonation technique and use the floating dawn mirror. If all of you are reasonable, you should understand that you shouldn't make an enemy out of me for no reason. At this point, Chunxi suddenly paused. Then he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan and said calmly, "Also, I want to clarify that I didn't kill Wuxia." After hearing this, a trace of doubt flashed across Yuhuan Tianzuan's face. He frowned and seemed to want to say something, but then he heard Chunxi continue. "So what I want to say now is, if all of you are willing to talk, then I can give all of you another chance. Let's turn weapons of war into gifts of jade and silk, so as to avoid increasing the sin of killing. If not, everyone, please don't blame my sword for being merciless." Although Chunxi wasn't an unforgiving evil person, he wasn't a good person with a gentle temperament either. If the mysterious woman hadn't saved him, he would have died with hatred in his heart. Therefore, although his words seemed reasonable in reality, he didn't leave any face for the 10 celestial venerables. This was deliberately embarrassing for Tiandu. Of course, if the other party honestly lowered their heads and admitted their mistakes, Chunxi could indeed consider letting them live. But with the lofty status of the 10 celestial venerables, how could they easily lower their heads to others? What? Don't we, the 10 celestial venerables, need face? If they really agreed to Chunxi's request today, then how would the 10 of them face the generals of Tiandu in the future? How would they continue to rule the outside world with the face? From the beginning, Chunxi had already calculated the thoughts of the 10 celestial venerables. The reason why he wasted his breath was actually just to give himself a good reason to make a move, so that he could be more decisive when he took action later. Speaking of which, Chunxi was really a little mischievous, as expected. It would have been better if he hadn't said those words. After saying that, the 10 celestial venerables' expressions changed greatly. Among them, Celestial Venerable Sunblaze, who had the most fiery temper, was so angry that he directly summoned his natal magic treasure, Heaven-Splitting Axe. After that, Celestial Venerable Sunblaze ignored Celestial Venerable Yuzhang's obstruction and rushed toward Chunxi with his giant axe. Little thief, don't be so arrogant. Yuhuan, you guys watch on the sidelines for now. Let me deal with him alone. Yuhuan, Miaofa, and Xianjun couldn't gain any advantage over Chunxi, but Celestial Venerable Sunblaze didn't believe it. He raised his giant axe and fiercely chopped at Chunxi. Axes were different from swords. They were designed to be heavy and powerful, and must kill in one hit. Therefore, as Celestial Venerable Sunblaze chopped down with his axe, a strong wind immediately blew in the air. In terms of power, it was even more ferocious than the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. This kind of fighting style that only focused on killing and disregarded defense was actually very rare among immortal cultivators. Celestial Venerable Sunblaze relied on the indomitable fierceness in his bones to fight for the position of Celestial Venerable. Therefore, even if his cultivation wasn't at the top of the 10 Celestial Venerables, not many people dared to casually fight with him. He was a living brute. But today this brute met an opponent who was even more reckless than him. Come on! Seeing that the giant axe was about to arrive, Chunxi's face suddenly flashed with a trace of excitement. He made a grabbing motion with his left hand, and a saber-like materialization weapon condensed in his hand. Then, Chunxi held the saber in his hand and directly faced the giant axe. Using strength to overcome strength. Using force to meet force. He wanted to take this opportunity to gauge the absolute power that he now possessed. For some unknown reason, the moment the tip of the saber touched the edge of the axe, the giant axe formed from Celestial Venerate Sunblaze's true yuan qi melted like snow under the blazing sun, and slowly dissipated into the void. This feeling was very strange. It was as if one side was holding a tempered steel knife, while the other side was holding an axe carved out of ice. Therefore, as soon as the two came into contact, the axe shattered into countless ice shards. Sigh, seeing this, Chunxi sighed silently. In the end, he still couldn't hold it in. After all, how could he, who had already grasped the laws of heaven and earth, be like before, only rely on the enormous amount of true essence to fight? If that was the case, wouldn't a Dongshu stage Xiaoxianist become a brute with nothing but brute strength? In fact, the moment Heavenly Venerate Sunblaze swung his axe, Chunxi saw numerous law threads on his body. Therefore, he only needed to cut off one of them to easily neutralize Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze's attack. Until this moment, Chunxi finally understood the gap between the Divine Transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. True Yuan was no longer the only standard to measure one's strength. Understanding and grasping the laws of heaven and earth was the direction he needed to study in the future. The more laws he grasped, the closer he was to the Great Tao. So, unknowingly, he had already reached this step. Thinking of this, Chunxi's excitement from his breakthrough immediately calmed down. When he turned his head to look at Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others again, there was only a pale feeling left in his heart. That was dull and uninteresting. So what if they were Tiandu? So what if they had more people? They were no longer on the same level. The reason was simple. It was like an adult fighting kindergarten children. Even if there were 100 children standing opposite him, he wouldn't feel any pleasure after destroying them. Punch at the Nanshan nursing home, kick at the Beihai kindergarten. This was just a joke. Perhaps this was the after effect of advancing to the next level. At this moment, in Chunxi's eyes, this great world that carried all the hopes of the ancient cultivators was no different from the Beihai kindergarten. He silently looked around the room. Wherever he looked, The other party would reveal a nervous and somewhat flustered expression. It was just a casual slash. Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze, who was known for his martial prowess in the divine capital, was seriously injured. Now he had been brought back to the Dragon Head Peak by the divine generals to heal. Seeing this, the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns immediately took out their life magic treasures, as if they were facing a great enemy. They were prepared for any possible attacks from Chen Shi. For a moment, there was a strange silence. When Chen Shi saw their laughable expressions, he couldn't help but think of the mysterious woman in the dark space. Perhaps in the eyes of that mysterious woman, he should be as insignificant and laughable as these people in front of him, right? The great Tao was endless. There was always a mountain higher than another. If he didn't jump into this small pond, he would never know how high the sky was and how wide the earth was. Thinking of the realm that the mysterious woman might reach, even Chen Shi couldn't help but yearn for it. However, yearning was yearning, reality was reality. The reality was, Ying was still waiting for him to save her. Nian was still waiting for him to go home. What were they waiting for? Therefore, after seeing the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns take out their life magic treasures, Chen Shi couldn't help but smile at them and say, "All of you come together, I'm in a hurry." As soon as his voice fell, a divine sword appeared in his right hand. Then, Chen Shi held a sword in one hand and a saber in the other, and took the initiative to rush toward the 10 heavenly sovereigns in front of him. Don't be afraid. Everyone attack together. This old man really doesn't believe that he can overturn the heavens. Yuhuan Tianzuan was also a ruthless person. Although he didn't understand why Chen Shi was able to defeat heavenly sovereign Yang Yan in one move, he didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, when he saw Chen Shi make a move, he took the lead to face him. It was still the same 3 lanterns of heaven, earth and man combined attack. But this time, they were not facing Chen Shi, who was at the peak of the semi-god realm. It was Chen Shi, who was at the early stage of the void transformation realm, and already had killing intent in his heart. I've already given you a chance. It's you who didn't cherish it. Then don't blame me for being ruthless. After saying that, Chen Shi couldn't help but let out a long roar towards the sky, and the sword in his hand suddenly glowed with a faint cold light. The third move of the combination of sword and saber. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse of heaven and earth could be shattered. Chapter 439. 3 styles of saber, 3 styles of sword. 3 styles of saber and sword. 3 styles of endless, 9 styles of returning to one. As soon as he finished speaking, Chen Shi held the sword in his right hand and the saber in his left. With a shocking momentum, he charged toward the 10 celestial sages not far away. At this moment, one of the 10 celestial sages was injured. Although the remaining 9 were a little worried about the strength that Chen Shi had shown before, after being provoked by Chen Shi again and again, the 9 celestial sages were obviously completely provoked. Evil thief, don't be so arrogant. This is the hinterland of Tiandu, under the shadow of the divine ancestor. How can you be so presumptuous? Everyone, let's take him down together. By Su Qingtian's order. As Yuhuan Tianzuan's words fell, the 9 of them no longer cared about their identity, and almost simultaneously took out their famous natal magic treasures. As various magic treasures flew out of their hands, the field suddenly shone brilliantly, showing the mighty divine power. Seeing that the battle was about to start, even the 5 divine generals, whose strength was second only to the celestial sages, retreated 10 miles away at this moment, not daring to take half a step forward. After all, this was a battle of the celestial sages. It was also the first time that the 10 celestial sages had joined forces to deal with one person. Therefore, no matter the result, today's battle was enough to be called unprecedentedly brilliant. Perhaps it was to make this battle more legendary. The moment Chen Shi raised the saber and sword in his hand, even time seemed to stop flowing, and everything in the void was silent. The third style of the divine skill. Combination of saber and sword. The saber is formless, the sword is formless, the vast expanse shatters heaven and earth. When he was still in the heavenly jade world, Chunxi had already used this move. However, at that time he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he could only force the move with a huge amount of vital essence. At this moment, Chunxi finally stepped into the insightful void realm. Therefore, when he used this move again, he suddenly had a different feeling in his heart. It turned out that this move actually involved the application of the laws of heaven and earth, and could only be smoothly used by those above the insightful void realm. The saber is formless, the sword is formless. Its purpose was to shatter heaven and earth. Chunxi swung the sword and saber in his hand. An endless saber and sword chi burst out in the void. Aura fluctuations could not be concealed, so the celestial venerables immediately felt that there seemed to be thousands of swords slowly forming in front of him. However, when they focused their gazes, they did not find anything strange. That was because this move had chi but was formless. Supreme Stage. That was an existence that surpassed Empyreans. Ever since the Grand Pure Saint ancestor passed away, the strength of the great world had begun to decline. It had been a long time since a Supreme Stage existence had appeared. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not give them too much time to think. Instead, he continued, "This person is not from our Tiandu. He is an external enemy. If we avoid him, how will we have the face to worship the sacred ancestor in the future? Tiandu's 10,000 years of inheritance, the sacred ancestor's illustrious name. Is it going to be destroyed in our hands today? This old man is unwilling and also unwilling. Only because I am one of the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu." These words were so beautiful that it was as if the 8 Empyreans present had been injected with chicken blood. Their faces immediately surged with boundless pride. That's right. So what if you're a sovereign? Since we are the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu, how can we easily lower our heads to others? This seemingly long and tedious conversation actually happened in the blink of an eye. Therefore, just as Chunxi was about to deliver the final blow, the remaining 8 Empyreans actually ignited the blood essence in their bodies. In an instant, the true essence fluctuations caused by the 9 Empyreans burning their blood essence were like the setting sun dyeing a large area of the sky red. Seeing this, Chunxi couldn't help but flash a trace of admiration on his face. Immortal cultivators couldn't lose their courage. He didn't expect that the 10 Empyreans had been in high positions for so many years, but the sword in their hearts hadn't rusted because of this. His opponent was so valiant, how could he fall behind? Therefore, this time, Chunxi didn't think of avoiding the spearhead at all. Instead, he immediately brandished his sword to meet it. At this point, the result of this battle was destined to be a fight to the death. Then, the 10 Empyreans united and displayed all that they had learned in their lives. They charged towards the legendary Supreme Stage in their strongest state. And Chunxi displayed the elegance of the Void Stage. With his own strength, he fought 9 Soul Formation Stage cultivators who were burning their blood essence and risking their lives. This battle was unprecedentedly bright. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. As the Jade Universe Glazed Cup flew out of his hand, the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying Formation, which had been greatly weakened due to Celestial Venerable Sunblaze's absence, immediately fell apart. At this time, Chunxi seemed to have expected this. He suddenly forced Wondrous Spell Heavenly Lord back with a slash of his saber. Then, he decisively pulled back his sword, allowing the sword that had been accumulating power for a long time to point directly at Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan only saw a cold light flash before his eyes. He didn't even have time to defend himself before the sword pierced through his protective aura and through his body, drawing a long line of blood in the air. Pooh! After suffering such a heavy blow, Yuhuan Tianzuan lost his ability to fight on the spot and instantly fell from the sky. If Heavenly Lord Inghua hadn't reacted quickly and caught him in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would have fallen directly into the endless void below. The formation has been broken. We are in danger. Everyone, quickly retreat to the Imperial Hall and regroup. We will wait for an opportunity. Go quickly. I will stop him. Heavenly Lord Wondrous spell was indeed somewhat courageous. Seeing that the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying formation had collapsed due to Yuhuan Tianzuan's injuries, he advanced instead of retreating. He held the 8 Views Palace Lantern and brazenly faced Qinshi. However, Heavenly Lord Wondrous spell, who was only at the early stage of soul formation, couldn't block Qinshi, who was at the early stage of void transformation, even if he burned his blood essence. Thus, in the instant that the other 7 people turned around and flew away with Yuhuan Tianzuan, Heavenly Lord Wondrous spell, who was covering for them, was struck by Qinshi's sword. As a result, he fell from the sky and heavily smashed into the floating island below. A 1,000-mile journey collapsed because of an ant's nest. Because of Yuhuan Tianzuan's momentary mistake, the 10 Directions Celestial Lords were instantly defeated. In gaming terms, that would be, the configuration of their formation was too low, and the margin for error was almost zero. A single mistake would instantly cause them to be wiped out. After Qinshi defeated Heavenly Lord Wondrous spell, he didn't rush to finish him off. Instead, he immediately chased after the 8 fleeing Celestial Lords. Seeing this, Heavenly Lord Yujiang, who was the strongest among them, decisively stepped forward and replaced Heavenly Lord Wondrous spell to cover for everyone. However, Qinshi was like a madman who had gone berserk. As soon as the two of them met, Heavenly Lord Yujiang was slashed down by his sword and fell straight into the void below. Wondrous spell, and Yujiang fell one after another. Even if they excluded the heavily injured Yuhuan, there were still 6 people left. Thus, Heavenly Lord Xuanjin stepped forward. Chapter 442. As Yuhuan Tianzuan slammed his palm down, the formation runes engraved on the plaza began to glow. Just as Qinshi had expected, this formation was indeed the final killing move left behind by the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor for Tiandu. Ever since the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor led the ancient cultivators to build Tiandu, this formation had been engraved on Dragon Head Peak. But what was strange was that the ancient books left behind by the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor did not record any description of this formation, so no one knew what this formation was used for. Perhaps it was an illusion formation, perhaps it was a killing formation. In short, it should not be activated unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, it was important to mention something important. It was not that Qinshi did not want to stop the formation from activating, but that he could not stop it at all. Unless he could kill the 10 Celestial Venerables in one move, the 10 Celestial Venerables would activate the formation at the most dangerous moment. This was a paradox in itself. After all, the formation carried Tiandu's last hope, and was also the foundation of Tiandu's standing in the great world. Just like playing cards, when Yuhuan Tianzuan lost everything, he would naturally place his hopes on this trump card. And now, it was time to reveal this trump card. It had to be said that this trump card was indeed somewhat extraordinary. As the formation runes on the plaza appeared one after another, the great sun-moon star formation above the floating islands suddenly dimmed a lot, and the entire great world fell into darkness. Seeing this, Qinshi could not help but be on guard and carefully analyze the changes in order to find the location of the formation's life gate as soon as possible. Whether it was an illusion formation or a killing formation, there would usually be 2 life and death gates when setting it up. On one hand, it was to prevent the formation from covering their allies, and on the other hand, it was convenient for the person setting up the formation to enter and exit the formation. But what made Qinshi feel a little strange was, the formation in front of him did not seem to have 2 life and death gates. As soon as the formation was activated, one after another, flickering lines of law slowly appeared in the void. Even if Yuhuan Tianzuan had not grasped the true meaning of the word void, he could still see these lines of law with his naked eye. Of course, in Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes, these lines of law were just waves of vital essence. The lines of law crisscrossed in the void. From afar, It looked like a large net covering the entire great world. Then these lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands became fish and shrimps in the net. At the same time, the soul mirror stored in the Imperial Hall suddenly released a dazzling golden light and flew to the center of the plaza with a whoosh. Unlike Yuhuan Tianzuan's despair, Chunxi seemed to have realized the crux of the matter. Thus, he immediately turned and rushed toward the soul mirror in the center of the square, and at the same time he slashed out with his sword in an attempt to destroy it. Chunxi had used 10% of his strength in this attack. But after he slashed out, the soul mirror embedded in the center of the square was like a black hole, and it almost instantly swallowed up the sword light. Even a stone thrown into the water would cause a splash, but Chunxi's sword light did not even cause a ripple. Seeing this, Chunxi did not panic. Instead, he continued to slash at the soul mirror, trying to forcibly stop the formation's operation. But no matter how many times he slashed, the result was the same. As soon as the sword light approached the soul mirror, it seemed to be affected by something and was directly swallowed up by the soul mirror. It did not even cause the slightest movement, and it disappeared without a trace. And just as Chunxi was thinking about how to destroy the formation patterns in the square suddenly emitted a faint energy fluctuation like an energy cannon that had been fully charged. Chunxi sensed that something was wrong. Just as he was about to take a closer look, the soul mirror in the center of the square suddenly emitted a blinding light. The light was so strong that it was not inferior to the sun. Chunxi subconsciously blinked. But at this moment, an extremely strong gravitational force suddenly came from where the soul mirror was. Chunxi was caught off guard, and was directly pulled to the ground by this gravitational force. At the same time, all the floating islands that were enveloped by the light were like space stations that had lost control, and were rapidly flying toward the center of the light. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.